What time do you have to leave?
Thank you.
I was outside.
Who's that?
Sunday I was thinking that.
Cynthia.
Cynthia. Looks like she's on Zoom. Where are we gonna go from here? Do we have any more people? Oh.
All right.
Joe's fine
Spring 2022-23 Budget Committee Board back in session. Ken, anything before we jump into Cynthia?
No, I don't think so. I think we're good to proceed. So Cynthia, can you hear us okay, Cynthia?
Yes, I can. Let me see if I can turn on the, maybe there's no video, is that correct? Can you see me or hear me?
We can hear you, but it's kind of low. I don't know if it's on our end or if your microphone.
It looks like my microphone's all the way up.
Okay, so it might be on our.
Can you hear me well enough, you think? I'll try to talk loud. You're okay?
We can hear you.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, commissioners and budget committee members. It's a pleasure to be here today. I apologize I'm not able to be there in person, but it is so nice to finally be moving out of the pandemic fog so everybody can see each other's faces again. As most of you know, Yamaha County Transit's primarily funded with state and federal grants and contributions from the county general fund, and then the cities of McMinnville, Newburgh, and the smaller cities also contribute to the revenue that pays for Yamaha County Transit. Your binder includes a document that highlights a few of the accomplishments for this year and goals for the 22-23 budget year. This coming fiscal budget year that we're reviewing right now, our focus is really to complete our high priority policy and program projects such as our fare policy, new fare collection system, fleet transition plan, and hopefully we'll make significant progress on our facility planning for Yamaha County Transit's long-term capital needs. We do want to build a strong foundation, and I foresee that that foundation will include a more environmentally friendly fleet of buses and hopefully a facility to support that type of a fleet. And as many of you may know, there's a lot of pressure, money, support, and so on from FTA, ODOT, and others for transit agencies to transition to low and zero emission fleets. And I do want to say thanks to Casey as our liaison and our support, because he keeps our feet to the fire on this issue. We aren't really there yet. We are taking steps in that direction. So I think it won't be too much longer, a few years, and I think Yamaha County Transit will have a very solid foundation and a more environmentally friendly one as well. So with that being said, I just want to mention one other thing, and then I'll jump right into the budget. We have been very successful in the grant world over the last few years. I decided to look up the last 5 years, and Yamaha County Transit has received $7.3 million in federal operating dollars, $4 million in federal capital grants, and then since the State Transportation Improvement Fund, which I'm going to refer to as STIF throughout this presentation, $2 million has been spent, or rather, I'd rather say invested in Yamaha County Transit. So there's been a lot of good news on that front. It's helped us do some good things for the system. So the transit budget begins on page 86 of your budget document, and there are about 20 line items that I'd like to highlight as I go through the presentation. I'll pause at each section so you can ask questions. Let me just see here. So, I wanted to mention that many of the changes or the line items I'm going to mention typically will have a State Transportation Improvement Fund or STIF project related to them. That's why there's a change. I didn't go into too much detail about that, but I did send a summary to Carolina of what all the STIF projects are. So if you want more information, you can get that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Some of you may be new, and you may not be aware that every biennium, the county has to approve a prioritized plan for projects and programs as part of the STIF plan. These projects and programs are pulled from the Transit Development Plan, and the Transit Development Plan was adopted by the board in 2018. So you're going to hear me mention that quite often. Someone's at my door. Can you hang on 1 second? Sorry. Hang on 1 second. I'll be right back.
Right.
I apologize. That was, at least it was quick. Okay, so now we're going to start on page 86 with revenue. There are 4 revenue items I'll highlight, starting with, I'm going to read you the last 6 digits of the line item. So 334.02 says Department of Transportation. The amount is $336,141. This line item is for federal 5310 funds that we pay to First Transit for their services. Now, typically this line item is a bigger number because we usually put bus grants in here. But due to the supply chain issues that are going on in our world, we aren't going to actually be receiving any, even though we have some buses on order, we're not going to be receiving them until after this fiscal year. So I just wanted to mention that. So that number is just 5310 funding that goes towards operations. The next line item is 334.18, and that is the State Transportation Improvement Fund, and it's for $1,550,167. That number is based on ODOT's projection for how much Yamaha County Transit will receive in this fiscal year. Line item 334.76, the small city rural. This is we get this every year, and it's the federal 5311 operating dollars that also pays for our first transit service. And it also includes the COVID grant funding that we received. So we have received a couple COVID grants, and the number in here is 5311, and then how much carryover we had that we'll be able to spend on COVID in this 22-23 fiscal year. And then last but not least, 34003, which is fare revenue. Pre-pandemic, we would budget 300,000 at least for fare revenue. The CARES funding luckily has allowed us to offset our losses in fare revenue, so we can get reimbursed for what we would normally collect. I had hoped that I would have the new fare policy and a new collection system finished by June so that we could, or I thought I'd even get it done sooner than that, but we're a little behind. So I think that we're in the procurement process, and we should have that system in place and be able to start charging fares this summer. So, and ridership isn't quite back to normal. It's moving in the right direction, but we're not quite there. So this was my estimate for fare revenue is 175. Anybody have any questions on the revenue for Yamaha County Transit?
Cynthia, it's Mary. Thank you for being here. Just a question, you probably have this somewhere. Can you give us an update on ridership overall the last few years prior to COVID, and where it's at now, even if it's just an estimate?
Yes. Typically ridership was I'm just going to use round numbers, but we usually were right around 300,000 annually, and it was growing slightly, and sometimes it would ebb and flow. It might go a little less than that. Then pandemic came, it went down to 20%, and then it grew up to about 50. I think right now we're at about 60%. We're growing a little bit more. So we projected the end of this fiscal year, probably ridership will be around 160, 170,000. So we're still far below what we were pre-pandemic.
Is that unique riders or just rides?
It's rides. We don't count unique riders. It is just rides.
Okay, thank you.
And everyone is struggling with this across well, not just Oregon, across the country, because patterns have changed, as you know. So I do think there are a lot of discussions going on about, what transit systems can and should do, et cetera, to get ridership back, and so on and so forth.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi.
This is Doreen App. I'm also on Zoom with you. And
okay.
I was wondering, can you explain, fare revenue is pretty straightforward, but charges for services, can you describe a little bit what that entails?
Yes, I usually do mention that. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe there weren't many changes to it, but what that includes is all the contributions we receive from the cities, and it also includes funding we get from Grand Ron. Grand Ron actually pays Yamaha County Transit to provide a little extra service, and we've had an agreement in place for a number of years. So every year I write to all of the cities and ask if they'll contribute, a certain amount, and we've gotten a little more than in the past, but typically the grand total for all of those things is around between $100,000 and $120,000.
Okay, thank you.
Should I move on to personal services?
Yes.
Okay. All right. There is a change in the number of positions this year from last year. The budget includes a total of 4 FTEs compared to 2 FTEs last year. These proposed positions are in line with the recommendations that were included in the Transit Development Plan that was adopted by the board back in 2018. If you have one of those plans and you want to look at the staffing recommendations, it's on page 9-18, and there's a table 9-10, which I'm happy to send to you also if you would like to look at that. But YCT has been operating for a long time as far as the administrative staff with pretty limited staff resources. So compared to systems of similar size and budget and complexity, staffing has fallen a bit short. So one of the proposed positions in this is actually the position I hold as a contract manager. So this budget would make it possible for the county to shift my role from a contract manager to a full-time employee. And there is sufficient funds in the professional services line item also to continue the management contract, which there is 1 more year left on that contract. And that should provide time for a transition and for a recruitment process, et cetera. The second position is for a management analyst, and there are a lot of tasks and duties needed. Contract management, procurement, technical planning skills that are currently, I'm getting that help through consultants when I can. But to be honest, I think it would actually save money if there were some of these skills could be brought in-house. And it would also move some of the projects along faster. So things like the fare policy and fleet transition plan, because I have limited time and procurement takes time and getting all those things out, they tend to get delayed because you just need more staff to be able to complete those tasks like that. So that's it in a nutshell. I don't know if anybody has any questions about personal services.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing none, we'll go to materials and services. There are 11 line items I want to mention, starting with printing, which is 511.16. This year that we're currently in, we didn't do much printing, and it's mostly because of the pandemic, and so we really just didn't print even what we would normally do. But we're hoping that as we're coming out of that pandemic, that we will be able to finish a lot of these projects that are currently in the procurement phase, and things like when we put in place a new fare policy and program, we're going to have to be, doing quite a bit of printing there. We're doing some updates to our schedules. And so I budgeted it at what we had been budgeting it at in previous years. The next line item is 520.04 for fuel. And I'm sure, as you all know, fuel is rising and at a painful level. I think our monthly invoices have almost doubled. So I did budget quite a bit more in this year. Typically, I'd been budgeting between 275 and 300,000, and this year I put in 375,000 for fuel. We travel a lot of miles on our buses, probably 650,000 miles a year, so it's significant. Line item 543.01, department equipment. This number assumes that currently we're working on a project where we're updating 10 of our current buses with the installation of hardware for all the new smart bus technology that we've been adding to the fleet. I expect it will be done by June and will actually be billed by June. This is a stiff project 7.4. And it's on track to be billed by June, but just to be safe, I thought, I better put a little bit into this budget year in case some of it carries over. So that's what this 35,000 is. In case we don't get it all finished by the end of June, we may have an extra invoice or two that comes in this 22-23 fiscal year. 610.01, professional services. This line item includes a number of STIF projects, projects 4, 6, 11. It also includes, for those of you who were here last year, may recall we were going to do a pilot project for service between Junction City and McMinnville. That project's going to be delayed because buses won't be here, but we do have some planning and some administrative work that needs to be done in preparation for that. So that's also included in here. This also includes the management contract, the BCB contract is in here. And I think that covers most of the major items in that line item. The next one is 61102, which is contract services for $85,000. This line item includes administration planning and contract service for STIF projects 2 and 5. Do you want me to tell you what they are? Do you guys have a list of what the projects are? Project 2 is basically the customer service fair programs, and project 5 is marketing. We have everything from website to our customer information at stops and shelters, bus graphics, branding, all of those things are in project 5. Let's see what else. Oh, turn to page 92 in your budget document. And
I don't think so.
oh wait, I'm sorry, I said the wrong page. Excuse me. I left a note in there from last year. That was bad. Sorry. Take that back. Thought I got rid of all those. Okay, so next line item is 611. Let me look here. Where'd I go? Grant expense. Oh, there we go. 640.01. Sorry, advertising. Now I mention this every year. This line item title doesn't sufficiently describe what I include in this line item because it basically covers everything that has to do with Yamaha County Transit's customer information program. So essentially, it's bus schedules, website, rider alerts, all the COVID alerts, bus graphics. It has a whole range of things that are included in there, and revisions to bus graphics. So lots of different things are included in that, and COVID announcements and so on and so forth. So it's more than just like an advertising in the newspaper or something like that. The next line item, 65203, lease payments. This is a change I need to make. This was included because right around the time we were preparing the budget, we were looking at some potential space that was near the transit center that could possibly help with, they're a bit overcrowded there at the transit center. First Transit leases that space from us. And so I included this thinking we might be able to lease this building like across the street, and that didn't pan out. So I think this could be deleted and the amount could be moved to 800.33, which is the transit capital expense. And then if we do find, something, it can also help us with our in our planning process for a new facility. So that's where I would move it to, unless Ken or Mike have a different idea. Now you can turn the page to page 87. And it's line item 68307, software license and maintenance. This includes data plan for our new connections, real-time bus information. It has a number of anything software related that we're keeping our smart bus technology going. And so that's what that line item is. And I have a breakout of that, although I didn't write it down here, but if you would like to see that, I can certainly share that. Line item 10, 720.17. Now, this is the most significant expense in the transit budget, obviously. It pays for the cost of Yamaha County Transit Services, fixed route, dial-a-ride, dispatch, all the operating costs, maintenance costs for the entire fleet of 30 vehicles. This is basically what pays First Transit, our service provider. The good news about this new STIF funding is that it really does help with the payments that we make to First Transit, and they had done some increases in hourly rates for their drivers, and there's the new contract and the increase in costs and hourly rates and hourly service, and because of STIF, we were able to cover those additional costs. And so the other good news is there's enough funding in there that they are able to add a new operations manager and a dispatcher within the pricing threshold of our contract. So that will take place in the 22-23 fiscal year. And that's been needed for a really long time. So I'm very pleased they're going to be able to add that additional staff resource. And last but not least, 740.04 bus shelters. This includes the cleaning of all the shelters, extra cleaning for COVID, and then it has STIF projects 5 and 7, and which includes the next phase of our bus stop installation project. And we're going to be doing some updates to a lot of the signage and bus graphics we have in the shelters. And let's see what else. Anybody have any questions about materials and services?
This is Jason Fields here. I just had a question. You say you've got 2 buses on order. Are they on this list somewhere?
No, I actually have, I think it's 6 buses on order, but none of them are going to arrive. Well, one of them is going to arrive before June. So we will get one that should be paid for in the budget year we're in now. And the rest of them, they're telling me, are not going to arrive until after June of 2023. So we won't, even though they've been on order. So most of the bus manufacturers are a year to 18 months behind, and they can't really seem to give us a date. You know, they're like, we're doing the best we can. They're running into all sorts of issues. So that leads perfectly into my something I wanted to mention on the capital section. So if you don't have any other materials and services question, I'll touch on that when we get to the capital section. So in capital, there are 4 line items, 800.33, and this covers a number of things. STIF projects 7, which is basically all of the small capital projects. It gets, hopefully, if we can make progress on this, we can even start doing possibly some design and engineering planning for a new facility. So we've kind of put a significant portion of the STIF funding in here, and it will give us the flexibility as we can move along all those capital projects. We can have the ability to do that. 802.03 touches on what you mentioned, your question earlier. So what we've decided to do is we have some older vehicles that were slated for replacement, and because of the supply chain issue, we're going to keep them in service, but some of them need fairly significant investments to keep them safe and in good state of good repair. So I've put aside $55,000 to put into those vehicles to keep them on the roads and keep them in good shape until we get the new buses. And last but not least, 990.03 is reserve, and this is also STIF funding project 10, which is reserve funds that we set aside for future use, and most likely these reserve funds will go towards us getting a facility one day soon. And I think that's everything. Oh, the budget does balance, and it includes the county contribution of $532,856, and I think that's it. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Commissioner Starrett?
Thank you, Cynthia. This is Mary Starrett. I had a couple of questions. I know we've talked about going forward, the contributions from the cities and getting some kind of a formula.
Yeah.
I know you said you were working on that. Number one, can we get an idea of what that would look like if there is even something sort of preliminary on what that would look like and how that would impact the county's contribution? And then the other thing is, in terms of new buses and that type of thing, what is the, in terms of ridership, we see buses going by and they're not full, and we talk about whether or not that is a the best use, because we've got maybe larger buses and not quite filled. How do we look at that with an eye towards efficiency?
So to your first question, I actually brought up the local funding at the Yamaha County Transit Advisory Committee. We met last week. And Heather, who's the community development director for the city of McMinnville, she made a recommendation that the YCTAC form a committee, could be a subcommittee of their group, it might be the entire group. We didn't clarify that yet. But with the goal of really digging in and finally getting a recommendation on the table for how should the local funding be handled. Now, if you go to the transit development plan, there are a variety of suggestions included in the plan. There's one where it looks at, if you were to come up with a formula for all the different cities at different levels, that's included in the plan. But it also mentions other ways that a local funding source could be implemented. So we'll start with what's in the plan at the committee, and then my goal would be that the committee will come up with a recommendation for, one, two, maybe a couple options that then the board could review. So we had kind of let that during this whole pandemic, we'd set that aside, and the committee did agree that it's a good idea to put it back on the table and start working on it again. So that's kind of where we're at with the local funding question. As far as the buses go, in this grant I just submitted last week, we are putting in for, this is a change from what we normally have done. We put in for 4 vans, so basically low floor minivans, and 4 mid-size buses that are the smaller ramp access mid-size buses. And part of the reason for that is exactly what you're talking about. I looked at all the numbers for ridership on Dial-A-Ride, the door-to-door service, and about 50% of those rides, there's maybe 1 or 2 people. So minivans could be fine to be used for that. And right now we're using bigger vehicles. But there are some Dial-A-Ride trips where we group the trips and there's a lot more people on and you need a larger vehicle. Everybody always thinks we'll get a smaller vehicle and it will be cheaper. The bottom line is really that it's cheaper on the capital side, and it's maybe cheaper in some ways, but the real cost is the driver. So paying for the driver and their wages and their benefits and so on and so forth is the major expense, whether you have a small vehicle or a larger vehicle. The smaller vehicles have shorter useful life. Vans only have a 4-year, 100,000 mile, and mid-size have about a 7-year, 200,000. The bigger buses have a 12-year and 500,000 mile life. So there's a lot of trade-offs. I think when we do the fleet transition plan, as part of that plan, not only looking at low emission and zero emission, I think another piece to look at is what is the right bus? I mean, what size, what type, from both a capital purchase and an operating view. So I think in the fleet transition plan, we will be looking at all those things, and then you as the board will be able to weigh in as well. I do think that this pandemic is creating some interesting challenges for transit and looking at service models and what is the right thing to do and what do we do. I personally think we have to get much better at serving key employers, like maybe we've got to do more work type shuttles, and those might be a smaller vehicle, where you're really, I just have gotten a call with a company that is looking into van pooling and looking into shuttling some folks, and they work 5 a.m. in the morning till 1, so it's different shifts. So I do think we have to be open-minded and look at some alternatives, but that's easy to say and not as easy to do. We have a plan that we've spent a lot of time and energy creating and adopting, and so moving away from it too much has its challenges. So but I think I do think there's some opportunities. So at a short answer, I think the minivans is a good step in that right direction, and doing more of the mid-size and looking at service models where we can become as efficient as possible. But our real cost is the cost of the drivers to drive those vehicles around.
Thanks, Cynthia.
I was just going to jump in because kind of being the looking at the schedule and stuff, we still have 2 more budgets to present that were supposed to be done by 2. So,
Hey, it's only 2 minutes after 2.
I am done, so that's everything. I hope I didn't talk too long, but I thank you all for your attention. And if you think of any other questions you have, I'd be happy to answer them later or via email or however works best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mary? Welcome.
A bigger audience this year. Okay, I promise to keep this as short and on point as possible. The library budget does not change very much every year. It's been this way for as long as I've been here. So the only line I feel the need to discuss is publications and dues. So I did not spend as much this past year on publications and dues because when the pandemic started, I continued to keep everything up to date, not knowing how long it would last. Well, partway through, I realized that the books that I was ordering were becoming obsolete before people were getting to use them. So I made the decision to take all single volume books or collections that don't get regularly added to, things that get replaced, and kind of pause updating on that. So now that we're open and starting to see people again, my plan is to get these things updated, but do it in a manner where I'm talking to our patrons, I'm talking to the people that come in and figuring out what do they really need? What books are they really interested in? And kind of start to, as I'm refilling, restocking things, make it more based on our community needs than kind of the generic library that you can go to anywhere, because ultimately it's about the people in this community and what they need. And it's my job to provide that for them. What I would consider large collections, the ones where books don't get removed, where books just continue to get added, those have been kept up to date because it wouldn't make sense to stop and then have to rebuy a big chunk at one time. In the meantime, while I'm getting this feedback, while things are building back up, all of the information that our patrons need can be found online through one of our search engines, LexisNexis, Westlaw, BarBooks. So it's all going to be available. It's not that there's going to be gaps in information or anything like that. This is just kind of the way I've thought to best move forward with things.
Yeah, and that also really helped us. If you look at the 2021 actual, we had a shortfall there. So, no general fund monies are provided to this fund at all. It's all the revenue is based off of court filing fees. And really, we receive that number on a biannual basis, really. So we get, the same amount for 2 years, and then they give us a revised number. So 2021 should have been almost 78,000. And when the pandemic hit, the state chose to reallocate those funds. So Mary's strategy there really helped us in moving past that event and carrying some funds forward to, the next fiscal year here.
Any questions? Nope. All right, I will let you guys get on with your meetings.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks very much.
Ken?
All right. All right, so the next fund is going to be on page 90, which is economic development. All right, so this budget is pretty straightforward. Just a reminder, Fund 26, this is the funds that we receive from video lottery revenues that are dedicated for economic development activities. Going through it, you're going to see a pretty significant beginning balance. And that's really because we haven't been rolling out doing the strategic investment grants for a couple of years. And so that's what's contributing to that beginning balance. In prior years, we were doing a lot of emergency business grants that were CARES Act funding. So we weren't actually using the video lottery funds for that. We were using CARES Act funds. So that's why we have the balance that we do here. It's because of the between CARES Act and now ARPA, we've been utilizing those funds for grants and not the video lottery funds for those grants. So that's where that beginning balance is coming from. The economic development, other 301.46, that 201,000. Again, that is that revolving loan program that we have a contract with COG that facilitates that. We haven't seen any activity. We have the funds budgeted here. We book it as a revenue. We have it as an expense. It acts as a pass through. We have an outside party that facilitates it. We just haven't seen any activity with that program. And most of the time it's because folks can get better interest rates elsewhere than what's in this program. So that's why we don't see a lot of activity. But again, we have the funds, we have to budget it, and we have to make sure it's appropriated and available just in case. So that's it for the revenues. Getting down into the expense. Professional services, there's a couple where that comes in. Our SEDCOR contract for economic development services is covered by this professional services. Also, the county's portion of the bypass lobbyists through the Parkway Committee is also funded through that line.
I have a quick, I wanted to go back up to the
revenue.
Yeah, up to the revenues. On the loan program, what do you, I mean, I have people that approach me through the community at times, like, is that something I can refer them on to this? And what is this?
They could, it's an option if they wanted to look at it and explore that. Again, we have Willamette Valley Council, Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments is our partner who helps administer and facilitate that. I believe we do have information on our county website, but if you have somebody who asks a question, you can refer them to me.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to share the information, the contact information for that
That
program.
is business loans, right?
Correct.
Something to that effect.
Right.
And then on the professional services, the SEDCOR,
Mhm.
remind me how that works again. I deal with them on another.
So there's two parts that come into play with it when it comes to SEDCOR and the county's partnership. The first partnership is the county is a member of SEDCOR. You know, they're a regional economic development. They work with Marion, Polk, and Yamhill County. And so they're a provider and we're a member with that. The second part is many years ago, I want to say it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we did an RFP process because we, you know, the county made an investment and wanted a dedicated staff person for Yamhill County for economic development. And so we entered into a contract with SEDCOR, who hired Abisha Stone, who's the contact, the employee of SEDCOR that's specifically assigned to Yamhill County and does work under that contract. And it's to be the economic development services coordinator for the county.
And you guys see the benefit of that?
That's a question for the Board of Commissioners.
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah.
What do they do? I'm just curious. Like, what do they do? What's the benefit?
Well, I would.
As the liaison, sorry.
Oh, you're the lead. Okay.
And I wasn't there when the original contract was put together, but essentially we would like them to be working with our industries, to partner with industries to help maintain and grow the businesses that are here. Certainly retention.
Okay.
They aren't lobbyists, so there's no, sort of direct connection between the county and the state necessarily, but that was the point of the contract. prior to, there was an in-house economic?
No.
Or wasn't? There was discussion potentially of someone who works for the county.
Okay.
But this was kind of chosen as the other path.
Yeah, and a little more history because I'm trying to think, because there was a grant through SEDCOR where they had a dedicated person for an extended period of time, and Commissioner Starrett could probably share more because I think that's even a little bit before my time in admin. You know, the original purpose of the RFP and the original intent with the contract was a lot around business recruitment and retention around economic development. And then March 2020 happened with declared emergencies, lockdowns, things like that. And so SEDCOR, and working with them, they did do somewhat of a pivot instead of concentrating activities on retention and recruitment. It came into more emergency relief. You know, how can we help businesses, advocating? They assisted with some grant programs that we rolled out. Well, at least they were active in the 3 grant programs that we rolled out under CARES Act with those various, and provided recommendations. And then there's the EDAC, the Economic Development Advisory Council, that stood up, that works with SEDCOR, that has also provided recommendations for the board as well. So I'm sorry, I jumped in.
I'm just
just
curious,
providing background, but you
I'm
know,
on
Well-
another committee that is connected, and
Mhm.
I sometimes struggle to just
Yeah.
see exactly.
Well, we
The
have
actual
had that
impact.
conversation. We've
Okay.
been having that conversation over the past year.
'Cause it-
Just because COVID was more, like Ken said, it was kind of a crisis mode. And so we were worried about Main Street businesses really, and that's not typically the role of SEDCOR. They're more industry partners. But then, you know, they do a lot of things well. For instance, the DCI fire, right?
Yeah.
Their role in that was to immediately partner with the owners of DCI and try and navigate that process of finding a new facility for them as fast as humanly possible. So they do a lot of really good work. But we have had a conversation over the past year about, you know, are we seeing the benefit for what we put into it?
So
And
of
are we
this
getting the
200,
services?
of the 200, how much goes to them versus?
I'm not sure how much the bypass lobbyist is.
yeah, I knew I was going to get hit with that. I was trying to look it
30,
up while it was
37.
I
like,
think it's 144, just SEDCOR roughly. And I would like to see that broken out. And the bypass lobbyist maybe listed separately, because I know we have those figures because we have to sign off on it, but just so that we can see what we're talking about here. And then to go back to the years ago, we had a partial grant that was for about, I want to say $60,000. And that funded a part-time SEDCOR person who was dedicated to the county. And I remember him working a lot on supply chain, localized supply chain, and doing a lot of that work. And then also industrial lands and really focusing on that. I felt like, and it was just a part-time. This is now a full-time. So it was only $60,000 as opposed to, let's just say, I'm going to say 144, because I think that's probably close to what it is.
Mhm.
But the conversations that we've been having is that, you know, as Commissioner Bershauer said, that SEDCOR really does have a strong, their strengths lie in that trader-sected, more the regional approach. And I know we've had conversations, I know I've had, you know, conversations with other county commissioners about, you know, bringing someone where we have a hybrid. And this is a discussion for another board meeting, but like a hybrid where we use SEDCOR strengths, but then we've got to be able to pivot since things are different and maybe take a more flexible approach to maybe having someone who's a little more in-house. And then also looking at our grants, and because that was a part-time position years ago. And now it's a full-time position, but we really, I think, need to kind of look at the different ways we can utilize all of the strengths with all of those different options.
So one way to think about it, this is clearly a bigger conversation than
Okay,
we're having here.
okay.
But one of the benefits of having SEDCOR is that they are able to maintain confidential conversations that if we had somebody on staff, all of our communications with your business while you're in the middle of a sensitive purchase, for example. If you were buying a property to put in manufacturing facilities, all of that would be public information, which is astonishing really when you think about it. And so this is a great example of how we maintain that level of distance for it. And
That
I'll
makes
say
sense.
a good example of this is that I think that we all and sometimes are busybodies in the world where we're like, we're going to find out about this thing, even though it's maybe not our area. And I was working on trying to find out more information, like, hey, who's going to buy the mill site in Newburgh? And it turns out that Clerk was handling the negotiations, including the support from the state. But because they're a contract entity and another organization, they can maintain that level of confidentiality that
Okay,
frankly we can't.
so that is a benefit.
Well, I would argue that's also a source of contention because we're
Yeah.
spending public dollars and we can't account for where all of that money is going or what we're doing with it. So it is a source. To some people it's a benefit, to others it's not particularly great because we can't describe everything that we're doing with public money. So it's
Well,
Well, I would say that
for this
we're
one,
paying somebody.
because as part of the discussion, and with the specifics with the budget, the one thing, when this budget, and it was something that was on my list to get to, I didn't get far enough down into it. This does require a modification because at the time that this budget was built, the board hadn't made a decision on the status of the SEDCOR contract. And so actually, I just realized that 200,000 did not include that. What we had there was the bypass lobbyists, and we booked some additional funds for some contracted services that may come up to hold some appropriation authority. But I actually do need to move, I want to say, double checking my math here.
Ken, I was wondering about that because I know that the bypass lobbyist is a significant expense. I was like, but it's not
Yeah.
56,000.
No, it's up
Yeah.
there.
It's- We always hold our wallets, right? I think that's the phrase that you say when Dave Hogberg comes around.
So what I'd like to do and what I'm proposing, the adjustment that we'll make to this budget is we're going to move 144,000 from the ending balance. And that'll be moved up into 61001. And that should be enough to cover both the SEDCOR contract, the lobbyists, because I also know there were some updates and changes to the amount that we're paying for the lobbyists. There were some additional services that were added last time. So that would also be included in that line. Plus there's a little bit of extra expenditure authority that's built in for any other economic debated.
And I think the lobbyists might actually be less, if I recall, but
I thought that went up, the contributions went up. I'll have to go.
I think there was another chunk on top of, or did,
There was in the previous, in the long session, if that makes sense.
It was only for the long session. It wasn't, okay, well, I'll take a look at that
But there's a
contract.
long session coming.
The most important part is just making sure that I have sufficient appropriation authority for the contracts that we currently have in place. And one is for the bypass lobbyists and the other is with the SEDCOR contract that was extended through June of 2023.
so can you just clarify, can you do that last move again in terms of the?
It's going to reduce the ending balance by 144,000 and that'll be moved to line 61001. So that revised amount would be $344,000 in that line.
So that we're keeping the SEDCOR contract costs current because that's where we left it.
And there's enough room that, because that's where we're still pending final renewal, but that should be sufficient appropriation authority to cover that contract.
And then the other thing I had asked if we could put our grants person into economic development so that part of that could be covered by some of the funds we get. So for instance, video lottery dollars.
Well, all of this is video lottery.
So-
Everything in Fund 26 is video lottery except for the 201,000.
So when, and I think we had talked about this and I don't know why in other words, to be able to to have part of that position funded because it has such a large economic development component, even though it might not be what we totally utilize that position for. I think we ought to make use of the funding that we have to cover that position instead of it coming out of our general fund.
So I think as an extension of that, what are the restrictions on video lottery?
Video lotteries for economic development activities.
That's it. There's
Mhm.
no, it's not, you can't fund personnel, you can't do this, you can't.
You could fund personnel, but the personnel is going to have to be, any portion of that has to be dedicated to economic development activities.
Right. What part of our grants managers' work is not economic development related?
I would say most of it.
Yeah.
I would say most of our grant work, there may be some connection to economic development, but our current grants position, which is grants and special projects, and the way that position is created is to work with the sheriff's office, work with admin, work with various departments in the pursuit of grant funding to put together grant applications, and then to also help manage projects that may result from successful grant applications. It's evolved. That's another one that position, as a result of the pandemic, there's been somewhat of a pivot because that person's experience on being on the application side of going through the whole process of applying for and administering grants, it was natural based on that experience to help facilitate and administer the grant programs that the county's been rolling out over the last 3 years, whether it's under CARES Act or the current ARPA funds. So that's why that position has been very active in helping me administer those grant programs to get the funds out, and it's based on that experience. How much of that is economic development? I haven't really done that analysis to see how much of that position really falls into that, because that's not really, I think in the past, we've had, like I'm thinking a previous projects that the grant coordinator has worked on facilitating and helping. And in fact, the current position does work actively on helping with the strategic investment grants and helping to roll those out and administer those grants as well. But that's a small portion of the overall scope of what that position does.
Well, I guess I'm confused because at least since I've been here, all of the work has been economic development, whether it's economic recovery or business grants, or even the special projects have been like Willamette Valley Vineyards, for instance. You can argue that's an economic development type project. I have not heard of any grant activity for the fair department or for the sheriff or any other department. So it seems like
we're working on applications for all those departments that you just listed. We've worked with the sheriff on grant applications. We're currently working right now with the fairgrounds on a grant application for a shuttered venue grant.
well, we can talk more about, because that's inconsistent with what I've heard from department heads. So we can talk more about that another time. I just think that most of the, the money that's being handled and sort of passed through with these grants is economic related. So I think there's a case to be made for at least a portion of that coming from here.
Well,
But I
these are
think-
obviously economic development related because they're in the economic development budget.
No, I mean the work that our grants person does most of the time.
Do you mean things like the American Rescue Plan money?
Well,
All of CARES, ARPA, even the trail was supposed to be economic related. Cynthia does her own grants, right? So I guess I'm seeing a strong correlation. My question though is, so
as an example, the water and sewer grants are going directly to cities. There's not like it's great for economic development, but
well, it was recovery, economic recovery. That's the whole point of ARPA funds. So that's what I'm saying. But if we're already eating into the beginning balance, correct?
Mhm.
And those funds were supposed to be strategic investment grants.
Which you'll see that there is funds that have been budgeted for strategic investment down below. But again, the big question is if there's discussion around moving a portion of a position, or if I need to look at a portion of the grant writer position coming into here, then that means that one of the other expenditure lines, I'm going to have to look at making those adjustments and how that adjustment plays out, because again, it's not, this isn't a large fund. It's large right now because we had 3 years of not rolling out strategic investment grants, but otherwise the only revenue that's coming into this is the annual video lottery funds that come in. And that's the only revenue outside of a small amount for pool and bond interest that's really coming into this fund. And so historically, the intent for Fund 26 has really been direct economic development services, whether that's SEDCOR with that contract, or putting out strategic investment grants that are putting funds out to make investments into startup businesses, or those with the proposal, to make investments in local businesses to help with economic development growth within the community.
Right. I'm remembering that it was like 200 or 250,000 that we were considering for the small business grants.
We've had that
There was
previously, we've had up to that amount budgeted in here. So the numbers that you see here
1920
is an
the-
attempt to balance, and then also ensure that if we want to start again doing strategic investment grants each year, we're going to have to retain some funds in an ending balance to make sure that it's available for the next fiscal year to award for other grants.
Chair Bearshower, it's here I can kind of like circle it and then you can identify it. So 1920 budget is when we dispersed. It's a good thing I didn't write anything
okay.
like terrible on it.
so the 200 or so that I'm recalling, that must have been part of a beginning balance that was being carried over. It wasn't like we just had this set number coming in for strategic investment.
No, like I was saying, the only revenue is 355.11, 361.01, and 361.03. That's really the only recurring revenues that are coming into this fund, which is the video lottery, and then whatever funds, interest and bond earnings that we're getting, just like everyone else. That's the only annual revenue that's coming into this fund.
Okay. So I think, Denny, to your point, and part of our discussion has been, kind of around this budget, which is, do we want to just serve the role of being a grants facilitator, right, for business investment grants as part of our economic development, function? Or do we want to retool this so that it can actually serve as more of a, hands-on businesses type of boots on the ground, Main Street, connecting with businesses and helping them navigate or retain or expand or whatever. So
Sort of like a chamber.
Yeah, I mean, to do the latter is going to take somebody with some skills and abilities, and the first one is
right.
administratively able to.
Yeah. So the bypass lobbyist we think that's over $100,000.
No, it's just about 80. Like I said, that we, in that line that was originally put there, that was to ensure the coverage for the bypass and also to maintain some appropriation authority within the budget. Just a reminder, we try to maintain some appropriation depending on a direction, a program, you know, we want to have some expenditure authority. So if there's a project or a contract or something that may come up during the fiscal year, that we have the appropriation authority to do it. Otherwise, we're not able to spend anything that goes into an ending balance. We cannot spend during that fiscal year. So that 200,000 included the bypass lobbyists. And I probably don't need the full 144 that I'm proposing to move
Sure.
from the ending balance into that professional services. It's just, it's again, to ensure we have sufficient appropriation authority in that fund. And that could also be used to, if you know, again, there's a big question about strategic investment grants on when we're going to restart doing that grant program as well. Because there hasn't really been a decision on how to proceed with that, because honestly, with everything with ARPA and all the various grant programs we're rolling out right now, we're up to our necks in workload right now.
So if we unpack the 21, 22, that 196,808, that's our bypass lobbyist said core.
That's what we had for that. Yes.
That's
And
what we
then
had
any,
budgeted.
anything else though, as part of that, or?
No, that was strictly it for that year.
But Chair Berkshire, the actual is the 111,857.
That was the
Because-
year to date when
Because
the
you
report was
budgeted
run.
For those two things plus something that might.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I guess, I mean, that's my concern is, do we need to move that much money? Because it doesn't seem like we have done any other professional contract services other than the lobbyist and SEDCOR.
Well, if there's questions about that, I can go back this evening after the meetings and I can recheck the numbers, and then I can come back and
Okay.
report on what actually we need to move.
And it looks like in 2020, 2021, we spent 219,458.
Right, right.
Which is probably, you know, why
Which might be
why you
more-
have 200,000 in there. Is because 2 years ago, we did spend
Mhm.
right about that.
Sure. But that's a big jump from that to 344.
I just have a question about where we actually have the actual bypass lobbyist number somewhere.
I can get that.
We had the total in another budget.
Is
that we
it in
looked at.
another?
We looked at it yesterday.
That was the 1039. That's just the
stuff we
the
collect.
outside agency's contributions to that
Oh,
contract.
and then ours, we bring in both of them. when
And
we
then-
come.
Correct.
Got it.
Okay. I'm just thinking, to see that broken down, to see, what we paid SEDCOR and what we paid the lobbyist, I think would be really good for us to get an idea of what that means. And then, yeah, those are my only questions about that. And as far as the grants, that's for another day, because as you said, we can hardly, we don't have the bandwidth for it right now. But I would like us to have the ability to have some flexibility in terms of what options we could look at for economic development. And I think that it would be important for us to address that here, because that would, give us our roadmap going forward.
This is Doreen. I have a lot of questions, but I do have the question, very fundamental, and I'm sorry if I'm just not informed, but what exactly does the bypass lobbyist lobby for?
The bypass.
Bypass the money.
Okay, but isn't it complete?
No, there's
No.
2 more phases.
Okay. I guess that answers that question. And then one other thing, just on the face of it, I know, Ken, you're saying to leave a lot of room in professional services. But just when I take out the fact that, there was quite a bit of money in this fund already because it didn't get used. And then there's pass-through loan money that, it's a net wash. So we basically have $300,000 a year for this fund. We have $125,000 that come up on this budget as actual grants, and another 70 for the fair. I'm not sure what the EV means. And then, so 20,000 for the park. So in total, we have $215,000 going out to actual use that I can see, not overhead charges or whatever, but actually being deployed for economic development. And yet we have this huge expense in professional services. 300 minus 215 leaves us in a deficit. And I understand that's padded, but I guess that's kind of important. And if the other person, not the bypass lobbyist, but the other person, I guess wouldn't it be better to deploy more money back into the community? And is there a way to do that? I mean, no, lotto funds can't be used for anything else, but being a layperson, I come in from the outside, there's $300,000 and $200,000 goes to two people who are deploying almost equal amount of funds in grants. Does that make sense?
This is Casey, or Chair. Yeah, of course. So during one way that I have thought about it, because you know, I'm not an expert in any of these areas, is that if you think about it, this from the perspective of we have a limited amount of money, and we can either use that money to hire somebody who knows how to do economic development, and actually every day works with businesses and the state of Oregon to either retain, expand businesses that have very high payrolls in our county, who are investing in expensive and complicated machinery that our tax collector and assessor pulls in tax dollars from. So there's people making money and can afford to live here, and then there's people who are doing interesting things and it brings in tax revenue. Having a person doing that rather than pouring money into the community are two different philosophies about how to spend this money in the community, if that makes sense. And my perspective on it is that we're never going to have enough money to pour money into the community too. And we don't really, frankly, I mean, I at least don't. I don't know enough about the smoke thing over at the coffee roaster, right, to determine whether that's a good investment of county video lottery dollars. But to hire somebody who does this on a daily basis and maintains those relationships seems like a better value for the money.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Thank you for explaining your take on that, because you guys see so much more than I do. So fundamentally though, like I think about it the way nonprofits, you know, you send in $20 to a nonprofit, for example, and they spend $18 of it on overhead and throw $2 at the cause that they're supposed to be doing. And I guess I'm kind of looking at it a little bit like that. Like we get 300 and we commit 200,000 to two people. And I guess that's where I get a little bit like, wow, 50% isn't a lot left for the actual engagement with people that could use the funds. But then again, I don't know what the contract length is or what we're obligated to or anything like that. So I guess I don't understand those historical contracts. Yeah, so I guess in my mind, my simplistic mind, without contracts, you could hire an employee for $70,000 a month to deploy, or $70,000 a year to deploy the rest of the funds directly. But I'm probably just being far too simplistic.
Sure.
Yeah.
Doreen, this is Lindsay. I just wanted to follow up on your sentiment, because that was the exact thought I had the first time I was on the budget committee, was because that year we were funding SEDCOR, but we had decided not to do any investment grants. And so the sentiment was, why are we paying administrative type of costs and we're not actually deploying anything into the community? So that's an ongoing conversation. And I think that is what is also fueling the commissioner's discussion around how we might retool our economic development team so that we're more, as I said before, kind of boots on the ground and having direct impact.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. All right. Are you?
Yeah.
Are you finished with that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I'm just on a off similar topic though. He mentioned, does the grant writer for Yamhill County do it for public people? I mean, like private or the private sector?
No, it's not intended to, for that type of position isn't. However, it's evolved over time because of the number of programs and grants that we've been facilitating. So there is a lot of assistance that does go out to folks that have questions, like cities that may be applying for the water and sewer infrastructure. So assistance, she'll provide assistance for those agencies as they're completing their applications and for questions and things like that. But for the most part, the original intent of that position was really to pursue grant funding and funding opportunities on behalf of the county, to support services, projects, things that
Got it.
come up.
Okay.
One more question. So you know how with county council, he kind of charges other departments. I don't know how that works, but you got the billable hours thing
We do
going.
that.
So if we do that for county council, who's doing work for other departments and not
We are.
just
We already do that.
for the grant writer?
That's included in our admin charges that you'll see in Fund 1010 and 1013 as an example. We charge admin fees into all non-general fund departments. And then we have discretionary revenue that comes in. That's the same that funds a portion of my position, Justin, Mike, Carolina, Megan, all those positions. And the grant position, the grant writer position is another one who's in that category where we have both admin fees and general fund revenues that come in to offset the cost of those positions.
Okay, thank you.
So much in the same way as county council, which you'll see when his presentation's coming up, but he also has county council fees to non-general fund departments and discretionary funds that cover his positions as well.
All right. Justin. Is that where we're at?
Actually, the next two items, we already presented them
Oh, we did those.
yesterday. So
Okay.
I think we're going to the next round.
I mean, it wasn't as dramatic a face as Pam's, but
Hear it again?
No,
Okay.
no. All right, so those are the ones we handled yesterday. Right. So we handled county schools, so we want to take a quick break or we want to just keep going through? Anybody need a break?
I can't interpret that face.
I think I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks for checking.
I was thinking the same thing. She has a face sometimes.
Uh-huh.
You can't tell which way she's
Yeah.
gonna go.
Christian.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to try and stick to the instructions I was given and only focus on changes from last year. We have had a change in personnel, which is reflected in the numbers here too, but we had a retirement last August. And then we had a new hire at the Assistant County Counsel 1 level that started in August and a second attorney that started at the Assistant County Counsel 2 level in January. So I'm happy to say that we're back up to full strength going into next year. And while the overall personnel costs have actually dropped from last year, we have gone from 2 attorneys back up to 3. So that's encouraging. Another significant change that you might have noticed is driven largely by the higher beginning balance this year. So the total revenue for my office is higher than it has been in years past. And that's due in part to a couple of things primarily. Ken and I have worked through this to try and understand how that happened. It appears that part of it is some one-time vacancy savings that occurred when we had the retirement. That position wasn't filled right away, so we had some money budgeted in this year that was not spent. And then when we filled that position, we refilled it at a lower level. So there's some one-time vacancy savings that are reflected here. And then we had a couple of bond issuances over the course of the last year, and the county took in some issuer fees, which were allocated towards this budget. And so those two items combined, I think, account for the bulk of the higher beginning balance. And in conversations with Ken and Justin and Mike, it was determined to leave those funds for the time being in the budget in anticipation of what we're hoping isn't going to occur, but just might, which is some higher outside counsel fees for a couple of matters that we still have pending. So I don't know if that adequately explains the revenue portion. If there's any other questions about our revenue or personnel, I can focus on the other items, which aren't a change from last year, but just to point out, we are carrying forward again another $15,000 this year under extra help, as well as professional services. Those are same as last year, but those are there to help cover outside counsel expenses. If passed as prologue, we'll have some outside counsel expenses for property tax appeals or labor and employment matters. We see those pretty typically year over year. The other outside counsel expense that is an unknown at this point is our defense of the county's Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance. We've retained outside counsel to assist with that. We weren't sure how much of that cost was going to be felt in this budget year. It looks like, given the way the court schedule has played out, that some of that expense will still be felt in this budget year, but some will be spent in next year's budget. So that'll help spread those costs out. And hopefully those two amounts will be sufficient to cover any of those outside counsel expenses. And then I expect, if again this beginning balance carries forward, we'll look at whether or not it makes sense to keep that money in this budget next year, or if it makes sense to reallocate it elsewhere. But I think, Ken, that is how we sort of came to these numbers for this year. So I don't know if that answers any questions you might have, or if you have any other items in here that you'd like to focus on. Otherwise, other than that, it's pretty standard. Not much change from prior years.
Chair, I have a quick question. Christian,
Yeah.
can you explain why the 2021 professional services was almost double?
Go
That'd
back
be-
and think
what's
about
her
what it
name?
was that I think
2021, that was 2020, so we would have been in contract negotiations with our largest union at the time. We
was-
were also dealing with a large number of grievances along that time. I'm trying to think on,
What's the contract lawyer's
that would
name?
have been into 2021 and into 2022. I'm also wondering if we had, if that was the year when we had those outside counsel expenses related to some of the trail litigation.
agree.
That might have been in early 2021. I can go back and dig into those numbers, and
Because that would be July 2020 through July.
July 2020 through
2021.
June 30 of 21. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was a commissioner for 6 months. I'm just curious why we spent so much money on outside counsel.
It was my understanding that Diana Moffett was a
That
significant
was-
portion of that.
That was legal counsel for bargaining for most
Yeah.
of that, and then also dealing with the grievances. And you also had a vacant position at that time as
So you
well.
had her lean on it, yeah.
I'm happy to go back and get some more detail for you if you'd like that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, any other questions?
No, Chair.
All right. Thank you, Christian.
Okay, thank you.
Have a great day. Chris Bledsoe, I believe you are in line.
Who is that?
Uh,
Oh, Chris.
treasurer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the volunteers who sit on the budget committee because it is a very, very important job you do. And I appreciate what you offer to the county in spending all these days studying these numbers. For my particular budget, which is not the smallest budget, but the smallest department in the county, it's pretty straightforward. I don't have any increase in personnel expenses. I do not anticipating requesting any increase in any of those expenses. And the basic materials and services are the one thing that is very different between me and the previous treasurer is that I feel a strong need to be well informed on what's going on in the economy in general, with the Federal Reserve and with the rise and fall of the interest rates, inflation, et cetera. So I do subscribe to a number of publications. I attend trainings, and I feel that enables me to do a better job of monitoring the portfolio and determining how we want to balance that and maturities, et cetera. That's really all I have to say. So I am open to questions about the budget.
Any questions?
No, Chris, I just want to thank you for actually coming to the budget committee meetings and for presenting because that didn't happen previous.
So I understand, at least I got, my voice got there. I didn't physically get there, but I do think this is a very important part of the process. So thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Brian.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon.
How are you?
Loving it.
Chipper dipper.
Doreen, Denny, Jason, thank you very much for what you do. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you serving on the budget committee and the rest of you as well. Nice to see you all. We're about to start the clerk's budget. Before we do any of you have any questions that you would like me to answer by the time we're done?
Not yet.
Okay. Are all of you on the appropriate page in your budget packet? Number one. Okay. Really, there are no significant changes from our budget last year to this. So, do you have any questions?
Really? There's no significant changes?
Not to the budget.
Not to the budget.
Other than that.
Other than that, Mrs. Kennedy? No, there are some significant changes, but they're really minor. There's significant changes to the passport photo allocation from one year to the next. But overall, $6,000 one way or the other is not a lot from one year to the next. We've stopped doing passport photos in our office through the pandemic. We're not yet doing them. So at some point in the next year, we'll likely restart doing that. So that's one huge percentage shift from one year to the next. But overall, a couple of $1,000s is a drop in the bucket compared to some other things. Admin fees to our office that we have no control over, huge spike, over 20% increase this year over last. But again, a 20% increase in a relatively small number is still a small number. So. Other than that.
Clerk, I don't have any questions for you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
About the budget.
Jason, kind of new to this. Do you have any questions? Any weirdness?
Is it still sunny outside? Oh, no.
Only in McMinnville.
Although I do notice the 3-day marriage license waiver has gone down for previous years, so people are not rushing into things.
McMinnville, Yamhill County is still a hotbed for folks coming into the area to get married. So as soon as the wineries start opening back up again, that number will jump back up again. It's not unusual for a couple to fly in from New York to get an application on a Friday and get married on a Saturday once the vineyards reopen.
Wow.
Just curious, what's the fee?
Small, modest.
Modest.
So bring all your friends and family, get married in Yamhill County, and then go home.
Clerk, while you're here, we've had a number of people on a variety of different issues asking about some glitches regarding either not getting a voter's pamphlet or the last issue we had, which was the postage situation, and then also getting, not getting the right ballot or that type of thing. Can you give us sort of a big picture type of what the situation entails and what we're doing about it?
So voter pamphlet, receipt of the appropriate voter pamphlet.
Ballot. In other words, some folks didn't get a voter's pamphlet. This is what I'm hearing. Some people didn't get the right ballot. They felt like they got an incorrect ballot based on their voter registration, that type of thing. So what are you seeing in terms of the big picture of these glitches, which are a big deal when you have an election?
They are a big deal, and almost every one of them is misunderstanding. So in Oregon, we have a closed primary, and a person must be registered in one of the major political parties at least 21 days before a primary. Otherwise, you will get a ballot that is designed for a minor party or a nonpartisan individual. In order to get 74,312 ballots out to the right person, we must pull that data roughly 30 days before the election. If you do the math on a calendar, you'll see that there's a week and a half between the 30 days before we mail and the last day to change your registration. And lots of people change their registration status in that week and a half. Not unusual, very common, especially for a primary. So if you registered in a political party last year after getting angry with your political party, and you get a ballot from our office this year that has just the commissioners, some judges, and a measure on it, there's a good chance that you're no longer registered in one of the major political parties.
Don't forget the labor commissioner.
There's this other little race going on that is
You had the list, and I just wanted to make sure you had
very
all of
well-
them on there.
Lots of options on your Bureau of Labor and Industries option this year. So there will be that choice for everyone as well. So when someone says they received the wrong ballot, very likely that they didn't remember changing their political party, or they received the first ballot that we mailed out and their revised or reissued ballot is still coming to them. The next thing you're going to hear from social media is, I received 2 ballots. So we do something, and this isn't my idea. This is something that our office has been doing for generations. There is a little word that is printed on all of our ballot envelopes between the barcodes. That first ballot that we mailed out has the word original on it. And any subsequent ballot that we create for that voter in that same election will have the phrase or the word reissued or replacement. That way, when that voter gets both of those ballots on their kitchen table, they know which one is which. And they always should vote the newest one and toss the oldest one. So it is very true and very common for folks to get 2 ballots. And that is because in almost every case, they made a change after we pulled that first round.
Thank you.
So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Yamhill County is participating and always has in the Secretary of State's distribution of voter pamphlets. So the cheapest way to send any piece of mail is enhanced carrier routes, block sequence sortation. So anyway, it's getting a thing to every box, regardless of who lives there. So the Secretary of State's office sends a voter pamphlet out to every mailbox, which is great and cheap, but it doesn't always get 5 voter pamphlets to the 5 people in your household. It just gets 1 to that house. And if your neighbors are not registered to vote, they're going to get 1 also. And then there's a little weavy set of roads over the top of Chehala Mountain and Rex Hill. Some of those addresses are in Washington County and some of those addresses are in Yamhill County, but yet the same mail or
Letter carrier.
letter carrier is delivering to those. So they're grabbing from their chair a stack of pamphlets and they're putting them in the boxes. And hopefully they get the Yamhill box with the Yamhill ballot and the Washington County box with the Yamhill County ballot. But what we've been doing instead is literally mailing a direct mailed voter pamphlet to those folks that we know historically get the wrong one. So our office spends the extra cash to do that second mailing of voter pamphlets to them.
Thank you.
Brian, I must say, I was very happy. Yes, I'm the disembodied voice. I was very happy to not get 4 voter pamphlets this year. I actually kind of liked that. It was an awful lot last year.
You're welcome.
So, Brian, I have a quick question. So we've had, recall mania this year. It looks like you budgeted for election reimbursement for 70,000, but we've had 172,000 year to date.
Yep.
So where did that money come from? Did it come from the school district and the county? And if it came from the county, where is it coming from?
Nope.
Okay.
None of that we've listed in your budget document so far today has anything to do with any of the recalls. So far, that is residual that some of the special districts had not paid in the previous fiscal year that actually rolled over into this fiscal year. And then from the regular election cycles that happened before the recalls. So that also includes some grant-like funding that came as election reimbursement that wasn't really tied to an election. It was given to our office for election-related items like drop boxes.
Okay. So then going forward,
Yep.
you're budgeting 92,000 for this fiscal year. So is there always a delay? Is that intended to be for recall reimbursement and then there's a delay for this election, or?
No, we really intend and have not budgeted for any recall investment in 2022, 23. We do intend and expect all the recall and reimbursement to actually happen in the balance of this current fiscal year, 2021, 2022. So none of the recall reimbursements will appear on either budget.
So they'll show up in the year to date.
Next year, you're going to have a very large, unexpected, unplanned for, unbudgeted opening balance.
Okay. So where
Ending
where do
balance
those-
this year.
Where are you billing those to?
So the Newburgh recall will be billed to the Newburgh School District. The Commissioner recall will be billed to Yamhill County.
Okay, so then Ken, where does that come from? Where does the money come from?
I haven't received the bill.
Sounds like a conversation you should have offline.
Okay.
What are
Well,
the
I'm just
numbers?
Curious
That
where
one.
the money comes from.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah. What are the numbers?
What will be assessed Newburgh schools and what will be assessed to the county?
I don't have those numbers with me.
Roughly? You have no idea?
I have no idea yet.
Okay. And then I have another question when you're done.
Well, but you've realized the extra work that it took to put those elections on.
Yep.
So those should be reflected in the year-to-date actual numbers, or no, or maybe we ran this too soon. I don't know, maybe.
Well, it
Much of
depends
it will
on
be there.
what extra numbers.
Yep, much of the postage is already there.
Okay.
Much of the vendor expenses are already there. All the personnel costs are already there. A couple of the largest portions that are not there include some of the amortization schedules.
Okay. So it typically, or have you, I guess, in the past two recall elections, did you have to hire additional help outside of a normal FTE?
Every election, we have 20 to 50 election board workers. Everyone that touches a ballot is an actual hired person that is on our team. They're just almost exclusively temporary or part-time.
Okay, which line is that reflected in?
Almost all of that is, some of it is in extra help, some of it's in election workers.
Okay. So it looks like so far it fell within, well within the budget,
Mhm.
right?
You're welcome.
But I wasn't sure if they were recorded yet or not.
Yep.
So it looks like they were. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Mike and the team over in the accounting office is very good about getting our employees paid. They appreciate that.
I have a question, and I know I brought this up last time when we were talking about that grant that came from what they're calling Zuckerbucks now, the Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg. So, and I had some concerns about that. And now, of course, there's stuff coming out, and that money went to what specifically? And that's not going to happen anymore, right? Because I guess that's been one of those grant programs that they've decided wasn't going to happen universally.
The vast majority of the money that we received in the Yamhill County Clerk's office, we spent on the ballot drop boxes.
Okay.
That will be used for the next 20 years.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you.
Handsome drop boxes that they are.
Yes, they are. And durable.
All right, any further questions?
No check.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Clerk.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks,
Yep,
Brian.
thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk Carrie Hinton.
Mr. Wharf?
Chair and Mr. Wharf, may we take a 3-minute
Yeah,
break?
let's do that. We're-
You don't want to jump from elections to tax collection?
I need a break for this.
We need, all right, yeah.
Yes, take a
All right, let's resume.
Are we ready?
We are ready.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, committee and Board of Commissioners. Doreen, wherever you are. Welcome, Jason, and Chair Elmer. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. I don't have a lot of significant changes, a lot of the strategic plan initiatives we had in place. Wait a minute, my bad, I'm sorry. This is Patty Lansadell, my senior office administrator and instrumental in putting together our budget. She runs a lot of the reports and keeps us working through the process and then puts it all together so we can present. So thank you, Patty, for being here.
Is that Eileen
Eileen is, I believe that is our Eileen listening in. She has a tax collectors meeting. She's double duty today, so she's checking in that way. So hello, Eileen. Okay, so again, thank you for having us today. And I don't have a lot of material changes in terms of major projects or initiatives, things coming on or off the books, if you will. I did want to spend just a few minutes and cover some bullet points. Some of it is a refresher for our existing committee members, and Jason, yourself may be new. This might give you just a backdrop. I'll be brief because I know you guys have been at this a long time, and time has been of the essence here in the last 2 hours. So in Yamhill County, my office is both the tax assessor, tax collector, and cadastral and GIS mapping, specifically for tax lots, not GIS in general, but we have a GIS specialist in our team. Those three components really make up core teams within the bigger team. On the valuation side, which is the assessment, we estimate the real market value for all property types. That's all residential, commercial, industrial, business, personal property, and any other commercial, any other property type. The real market value right now for Yamhill County is just over 20 billion with a B. So there's a lot out there to appraise and to put value on. And ultimately that trickles into the next step, which is assessment and levying tax, and then levying tax to bill and collect the tax, and then to distribute. So 20 billion in real market value. We appraise 30 on average over the last couple of years. I'm not specific for this year because we're not quite through everything yet, but we do about 3,600 new accounts for new construction, new builds, new homes, new buildings, new storage units. That's been popular, multifamily housing, that sort of thing. And then after we get all the new stuff done for the year, we're looking at reappraising existing parcels to make sure the inventory is correct, houses that have come and gone, barns that have come and gone, outbuildings that went up that we didn't know about. And we do about 4,400 of those. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 accounts are maintenance every year. We also handle all the property valuation appeals. I send you your tax statement, you see your real market value and your assessed value. You disagree with that. We do mass appraisal for 47,000 accounts roughly. Doesn't work for everybody. Somebody doesn't like what they see, they come in. We work with them to explain how we got there. We review their account for anything that might be could be changed, altered, make sure the inventory is correct. But ultimately, if they appeal all the way to the Oregon Tax Court, that's where we come in to defend the county's position on valuation. And we haven't had a lot of those, but we always seem to have 2 or 3 a year, and they take up a ton of time. And one of the things that Christian may have forgot about in his personnel services expenditure was we send him the bill for outside counsel when we need them. So I couldn't talk to him when he was facing this way, but I'm like, Christian, because I sent him some bills for that. But just know that we defend the county's valuation appeals at the state level and local level. On the tax side, we once we've created the values, we turn I take off my assessor hat, I put on my tax collector hat. We take that and we create levies, we apply them to the parcel, we send a tax bill. Everybody pays their bill on time, and then we take the collected funds and distribute it out. This year, we're going to collect a little over 155 million in funds, and we will distribute that to 43 different taxing districts. So a taxing district is going to be everything from a water district to the schools, to the cities, to share or the general fund for the county, excuse me. And those sort of things, first responders, et cetera. About 28 million of what we collect comes to the county directly. And that's how the county gets their piece of property taxes for what you guys are doing in budget purposes. A little more on the tax side, just briefly, just a couple bullet points and we'll get in here. We have about 12,000 accounts that receive some sort of tax deferral. So the property is getting either a farm or a forest or a historic or riparian or wildlife. The programs seem to be added to every year, but we have to manage. It's an unfunded mandate. We don't get additional dollars from the state, but we are required to audit and make sure that properties receiving tax deferral are in compliance. We have 5,000 accounts approximately that receive some sort of tax exemption. So again, that's something we have to monitor. Do you qualify for a tax exemption? How much? How much of the property are we going to exempt and how much are we going to tax? All those sort of things. That all happens on the tax side of the house. And then our cartographer, who is, for those who don't know, a cartographer keeps cadastral maps in a digital form. That's where the tie into GIS comes. I call it his drawings because I don't know exactly the technical references of how to do it, but he keeps the ownership records by map drawings. So a subdivision goes in, he draws all the lines, creates the accounts, we figure out who owns those. So to bring that sort of big picture, it's value it, create the tax, bill the tax, collect the tax, distribute the tax, and then maintain ownership through the cadastral mapping. Those are our three big things. Okay. Moving on to the budget piece then. So I've had this same sort of approach. Now, those that have been here long enough, multiple years, but really I want to reiterate that our office isn't a revenue generating office. We generate a ton of revenue, but not for our office. There's nothing that's in the tax collection that ends up directly in our office as a reimbursement, except for what we get through the county's process of distributing discretionary funding. So everything that's collected for the county goes into that, to those coffers, and then we are funded through what we get through discretionary income. And so if I look, I'm going to try to turn this and do this. There we go. So the one piece on, I don't have a page number on here. 93. 93. I sure hope this is 93. I don't know if our page numbers is printed at the bottom. We just printed our section, so maybe that's why. But I'm looking at the top section for revenue. It says assessor first. The GL 1012 334.29 is the CAFA grant. It's called we refer to it all the time in its acronym, but really it's it's a fund that was created to the county assessment function funding assistance grant. That's really the one thing we get outside of the general fund from the county that is significant in revenue. This year it's at 400,000 in our forecast. Last year it was, I believe it was 400,000 also. And we came over a little bit. Last year looks like it came in, or the year before it came in at 400,680. There's nothing really slowing. You're hearing a lot of talk about the market softening, but it's not slowing. So prices are coming down, but transactions are still happening. And that's relevant because CAFA is funded by mortgage deeds that are recorded and other things that are recorded. So the clerk's office records something, a portion of the fee to record that goes to this CAFA bucket, and then delinquent interest on past due taxes or delinquent taxes collected in a foreclosure during recovery. So recording fees and interest are the two primary pieces that go into CAFA. We just pay the state at a set level that everybody else pays at. The state then goes through the grant process and awards us back portions of that. And we're not doing as bad as some counties in terms of how much we put in versus how much we get back. There are some counties that put in 3 times what they get back. We're actually pretty close. So that's not a long-term solution, but year over year, I don't see a decline in the model that it is right now. I think the dollars going from our county to the pool will be somewhat similar, and the dollars coming back will be the same.
Chair. I know I keep bugging you for different things like the business property tax and how we can adjust that and deal with that. And the other thing is the CAFA, since we're not covering what we need to cover based on the money that we get back once the state takes a piece of that. So one of the things, would it be something that we could do, getting the other jurisdictions to pay, because basically you're processing all of this and dispersing these funds to each taxing district, and there is no service fee for that. Is there something we could do?
Well, it's being looked at. So during the last long session, I served as the president of Osaka, and I was on the House Revenue Committee for long-term funding for assessment and tax. And one of the ideas was some sort of cost share, right? So a fraction of what we spend not, excuse me, a fraction of what we distribute to the districts could be held back. That would be indexed because as the base goes up, that reserve, that holdback would go up. That's that sharing component. There's some other ideas about increasing recording fees or just a whole nother way to collect a fund and index it to help fund assessment and tax. Because the reality is it used to be 40% of the budget. Now it's 10. And the entire difference is landing locally on counties to fund. So we're picking up the bill to make sure that we can keep this operations going to fund those different districts. I'm personally of the opinion there should be a cost sharing approach, but it's going to take something widespread. I don't think it's something we can do locally, but that's an idea. You know, in my previous, is Doreen still there? Doreen? My previous life in banking, you know, servicing fees and selling off mortgages and keeping the servicing fees retained because you'd still send the bill, collect the bill. You don't keep the asset, but you're doing all the billing work. It's a very similar concept. We take the money in through these different venues. We send it all out as it needs to be sent, but we don't keep $1 per X or 25 cents or anything. So that is one thought.
I am still here, by the way. It just takes me a minute to turn off the mute button, and I'm sorry.
So back to revenue then. The rest of the items, you know, the next largest one I think is 12,000, and that has to do with transferring. That's not even actually revenue. It's offset by expenses because we process manufactured home transfers by choice. It's something we could just send all of our citizens to the state for. Drive to Salem and they'll take care of it. We do the paperwork in-house for them. And then we're able to take the fees we collect from that process, send it to the state, and then they give us a kickback because we do the work for them up front. It's not, you know, it's not clean, but it's something. And primarily it provides a really good service to our citizens. And they really are thankful that they're not sent to Salem to deal with the BCD, Building Codes Division. Okay, so that's really what I have for revenue. So the key component there is the 400,000, which holds flat. We talked through what goes into that. The rest of it, you know, year over year, you're not seeing a material change. But did you have any questions on any of the other revenue items? Going once, going twice. Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Nope.
Chair. Derek, is that, where are we? Personal property and manufactured homes, is that the business personal property tax?
No, so that is when you're delinquent on real property, like ground in a stick-built house, then you go through a foreclosure process. When you're delinquent on a manufactured home, personal property manufactured home, homes in a park that you don't own the land, but you own the trailer or the home, and you go delinquent, we file a warrant. So we file a warrant that says you're delinquent and you need to pay. And then over time, if someone comes in and pays off their back taxes and clears the warrant, then we get refunded the money we spent to file it. So it shows up as a revenue, but it's really a reimbursement for the dollars we spent to file the warrant originally.
And thank you. And the business personal property, is that somewhere else down here?
There's no revenue item attached to business personal property. It is part of our tax roll, and we collect a little over $300 and some thousand in taxes related to business personal property. But none of that hits this budget. It's not part of our operational budget.
But you have to expend staff time.
Oh yeah, we have one person dedicated to that. We get into personnel, which is where we're heading. Do you want me to identify that person?
Well, I'm just
that sits?
going back to that unfunded mandate thing that seems to keep cropping up. And then also I talked to Christian about how do we mitigate that, since it is, as Denny pointed out, really a very onerous and cumbersome tax for people time-wise to pay on something they've already paid. But also what you suggested was that we try to raise the limit to 50,000 instead of 21,000, so fewer people, maybe 800 fewer people would pay that tax?
Yeah, the mechanism there is that there is a threshold that if your assets fall below this threshold, you're not taxed. You're considered exempt. It's part of that exemption pool that we talked about. So the higher you make that limit, the less people are going to be taxed. It's a cliff though. It's all your assets are under that number, or you're just over that number. And if you're just over, you're taxed on the entire balance. If you're just under, you're exempt. So it's not like the first 20 are exempt, the first $20,000 in assets are exempt, and then you get taxed. You're either in the bucket for not taxable or you're out of it. So you move
Can
that
that be
bucket.
changed?
Christian's.
He
is he
said
gone?
no.
He
He
said no.
checked, well, he checked with the state and basically it wasn't, again, like the foreclosure equity issue where we give people their money back instead of taking it. He checked and basically it's per statute.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so he then, at this point, then he understands the mechanics. There is an element in there that is a specific number that we tax above and we don't tax below. And if that number changes, well, then those who get taxed will change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Danny. And everybody else.
Sorry is not the right word.
So,
Yeah.
but you said the total.
If you have
is
questions, go ahead.
The total's about 300,000?
In the terms of the tax roll, yeah.
Okay.
So
How many,
that's not the real market value of personal property. It's what we collected in taxes. So the real market value creates an assessed value, divide that by 1,000, apply a millage rate, then you get the tax dollars. So the
is that
actual,
a lot of people? Is it a
there's
handful of
20, I'd say there's probably 3,500 total personal property accounts. And I would say 1,500 to 1,700 of those are below threshold.
Okay.
Really close to 2,000. I don't have those exact numbers, but I'd say we're actually taxing about 2,000 and the rest are falling under.
Okay. Wow.
None of that has to do with manufactured homes.
Are we talking about businesses? Are we talking about business, personal property?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know. I'm one of those people.
All right.
Yeah. Right.
If you have questions about it, we have our staff person that handles all our personal property accounts. She's probably the best in the state. She really understands the rules and how to navigate that. If you have questions about it, you should definitely contact her.
She's amazing.
She'll walk you through whether it's going to happen or you're going to send me Christmas cards, the colorful kind. Okay, so coming down then to, we talked about CAFA grant, coming down to personnel, and this really is our story. It has been for years. 87% of our total operating expenses are personnel. We don't create revenue. We are an X body. We are subject to the contracts that are negotiated, the increases that are bargained and approved. And so our number in terms of where our expenditures are going to go every year, I can almost tell you right now because I know what next year's contract says until we renew another contract. I think Ken mentioned 2024 maybe. That really sets the bar because like I said, 98% of our expenditures are, 87% are personnel expenses. So as personnel goes up every year, we've got to find ways to cover it. Now, initially, when the budget process starts, we're given a discretionary increase. The beginning of the budget process, there's members of the budget committee that, propose how much discretionary increase is going to be allocated to each. We start, in January with those numbers. Our office was given a 3% increase in discretionary. That accounted for about $52,428 was what our discretionary was bumped by. Our personnel expense alone increased to 152,000. I should just leave these on, a little over 152,000. So we're not covering the contractual personnel expenses out of the gate with new discretionary income to start. So from there, we find out, okay, well, where can we save money on vacant positions? Where can we save money on other areas that are expense items to get us to today where we have a balanced budget to present? And in theory, there's no ask back. We've covered the gap. I'm thankful for this challenge, is that I've got a tenured staff, very little or no turnover. We had one person leave us after 6 years to stay at home, work from home and that sort of thing. But other than that, we have very little, no turnover. Everyone seems to be approaching or at the top of the scale. So they're all step 7 or farther. And that's just part of this pressure on personnel expenses is that we've got tenured employees, no turnover, which is a good thing. I celebrate that because it's that level of expertise we need when we're dealing with this technical of an issue. So in short, we adjusted for everything that was coming up in 2023. We do have one vacant position as a commercial appraiser. And we went through 2 interviews, or we recruited for it twice. Once we pulled back, we didn't get anything qualified. The second time we did a couple of interviews, but we couldn't fill the position with the applicants we had, is the bottom line. So that position remains open. We took the balance we could out of that vacant position and absorbed as much as we could of the 152 in personnel expense increase. It leaves us with, after all of that, 70,560 and what will be an ask back. So after all the personnel expenses are handled, we are short 70,000 to fill about 2/3 of a position. So we had a negative number. We took as many dollars as we could out of that position. It wasn't enough, so we still need 70 to make that one position whole. And was that a question?
It is now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard.
Oh,
what?
no, I didn't ask a question, but.
Oh,
Chair,
okay.
just to clarify.
Yeah.
Is that for the existing position or is this for the commercial appraiser that you were seeking?
This is still a commercial appraiser that we're seeking.
Okay.
Our FTE, our head count, for those that don't speak FTE, the number of employees in our office has been the same for at least 10 years. It's been 19 forever. I can't really even speak before that. I'm going into my year 10, so I know that's right for 10 years, but we probably did need to add some people along the way, but we had enough trouble filling the vacant spots we had that really didn't make sense to even ask for additional bodies. Now, fast forward maybe over the last 3 or 4 years, we've deployed some new technology that makes me think we don't need additional bodies. We can use this other software to do what we'd normally do with another 4, we can do with what we currently have. And that's something we've done over the last 3 years, 3.5 years. Well, without going into the whole recap of assessment and tax-free Yamhill County, we've just found some efficiencies through new technology and redeployed resources to do things that we should have been doing a long time ago. And we still need to keep those going. So it's not like I now have extra bodies. I was short 5 bodies and found a way to fill that gap without adding bodies. So.
But to clarify, the add back is in order to fill a position that currently isn't filled, right? That you're seeking.
Yes, it's a vacant position that we've had for years.
Yeah.
It's vacant right now.
Okay, I just want to make sure that wasn't rather than existing.
Right.
Thanks.
There's nobody sitting in that seat. Is that what you're?
Sure. This is the one that you had trouble filling.
We did. Yes.
I didn't mean that as about a judgment. Just like
No, there's.
okay,
I mean, there's reasons that are going in there that are bringing this forward consistently, and it has to do with the level of the position is so technical that I'm asking someone to either to be frank, we're not going to be strongly competitive in salary. So I'm asking someone to come into Yamhill, relocate, move from out of state, or commute into Yamhill County for a highly technical position that they're probably leaving their existing position to come to, or for whatever reason I get really lucky and that person is coming to Yamhill County for another reason and happens to have all the skill sets I need and would love to work locally. And that does happen. And our other commercial appraiser came to us because he moved back to the area, has family here that are aging, wants to be close. It's the only reason we got him here. So I'm working hard to fill that position. And what I'm going to end up doing most likely is adding other duties to it as a way to sort of bridge somebody who may not come out of the gates ready, but in 2 years maybe could be ready. Cool. Is where I'm leaning for that one.
Yeah.
It also is a challenge when every year it's an ask back. If you're not covering your personnel expenses that are agreed to per the contract, I'm starting in a negative hole. I'd feel bad about bringing someone in and going, well, you're good until June. Then if that budget gets approved, we'll move forward from there. So it's a tricky situation. It really is. But I think we maybe have some retirements on the horizon, hooray for them. And then the cycle maybe starts to get more normalized with normal attrition, some entry level, some senior level. Right now we're riding high with a lot of tenured persons.
Derek, I have a question in the budget on the appraisers, and the appraiser 3 positions, it says there's 2 full-time. It says last year for budgeted and this year. And the total amount in the budget is 97,332, but that would be 48,666 per year. So I'm guessing, no, that's not the amount being spent for 2 of them. And then I'm just wondering how it was placed into the budget. So we transferred last year in last budget committee, 86,000 from the balance so that you would have room to hire a level 3 appraiser. And I know you didn't. So I'm wondering how this is placed on here so that I understand, because the level 2s are making on average 65,945. And I'm guessing that the level 3s don't make less than them.
Thank you, Doreen. That's a great question. So what you're looking at is the amount we could afford to put in the appraiser 3 bucket to balance. If we are approved the additional $70,560, it would go into that line item, which is now 97, and bring it up to what we'd be paying 2 commercial appraisers for. Actually, it's 1 commercial appraiser at the step 7 that he's at, and the new commercial appraiser would come in at a step 4 based on the budget.
Okay, so in
70 to make that whole in order to be more fair.
Okay, so it'd be reasonable to say the FTE kind of for the 97 is more like 1.3 or something like that?
Perfect, you're right.
Okay, good.
Thought
Thank you.
about that in terms of how you portray it in the budget, and it seemed like an easier approach working with Ken and this team to leave the whole number and explain the gap.
Okay.
So we mentioned that we would remain at 19. We've been at 19 for 10 years. We talked about the ask back. The creation of the deficiency came at personnel expense increases. You're going to hear this. I mean, I'm not the only one that's a personnel department. So other questions about personnel that I can assist with? Mary, did you want to know the appraiser 1 in line item 1012-403.01? The 1 FTE is appraiser 1. That's our personal property appraiser. Business personal property appraiser.
Could you say that again?
Oh, boy. Yes.
403.01.
403.01.
Thank you.
Any other questions on personnel? Okay. I'll be quick on material and services. This one's pretty easy. It's up 1% year over year. The major contributors to materials and service software, we're getting an incredible deal on the software we have right now. We had some contract challenges that we ultimately settled on a really nice contract for the county 6 years ago, which put our maintenance fees on our primary software program at $35,000 until we go to something different. In comparison, Benton County, who has the exact same platform, is in the $220,000 per year. So we've got a really nice arrangement that is working really well in our software for assessment and tax. The one item that's going away this next year in GL 1012-513.06, it says software. Below it is aerial imagery. Final payment, $70,000. We had contracted with a company called Eagle View to fly the county for high resolution aerial imagery to use for desk appraisals and other things that we need in assessment tax. They flew 3 flights every biennium, and this last flight we just got February of this year, that's the last one under contract. So that 70 comes off. If the county decides to go forward with that program, I've reached out to the first responders, to YCOM, City of McMinnville, City of Newburgh, Mac Power, Water and Light, some other stakeholders that are very interested in partnering. And we might be able to find a solution for funding that won't be my budget per se, and maybe an easier lift for the county. All that predicated on there's an appetite to do it again. People are really finding benefits to it, but we'll see when the checkbooks come out. That's going to keep going or not. So that one's in its last year. The rest of them are services, software and licensing. We talked about that. That has a huge savings in it based on what others typically pay for CAMA programs. Postage is a big one. That's, we're at the whim of how many tax statements we have to mail out. And professional services are paddle reports and legal services, programs we use. These are all business essential items. The ones where we can trim, and we do annually, we find ways to, we started a paperless committee. We went paperless over 3 years, saved us a ton in office expenses and this and that. And we'll find little things along the way, but the reality is at, I think it's 300 and some thousand total for all services. Without taking software out or professional services, we're kind of just making sure we're keeping things tight. I don't see a major windfall anywhere. Professional services, software and licensing. Okay, so that's what I had to cover for materials and services. Questions on that?
Nope. I see none.
Going once? No. And then the last thing is on the final, well, my final page of 91, 2, and 3, maybe for you. You'll see the reserves are zeroed out. So that those 2 reserve line items were carrying balances for some time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Derek.
Yeah, is that
Nice
good?
job.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. Appreciate.
As always, if you need anything, just let us know.
Thank you very much.
To inundate with numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you.
Joe.
Can I ask a clarifying question on this discretionary allocation, the big sheet? So so Derek was talking about the 3% increase is 52,428. But some of them, most of them have 6%. Is that just based on?
That was based on the discussion that we had during that work session, that not every department got the 6%. There were some who got a 3%, especially those, the ones that you're going to see that were only got the 3% are those that have had several large add back requests approved in prior fiscal years.
Okay.
And so the intent is to help kind of balance, because again, the discretionary allocation is not to help a department keep pace with their personnel costs. It's not intended to cover that full amount. It's to help offset the rise in costs that each department may experience. And so the ones that, there were several departments that were held flat because we were seeing balance history. There were others that were given a 6% increase because we haven't seen it. They're having the same struggles. They're making cuts. They're making, tough decisions within their budget. And so there were 6%. And then there were others that have had several large discretionary add back requests that have been approved in previous fiscal years that we thought it'd be best to make that 3% and then go through this process and see if they're able to balance within that, within their resources. And then they could come before the committee and make a request for any shortfalls that they may have.
Okay.
So, and I know that's not a popular decision with some of the departments,
That's why we
when
make it
we
together.
do that. But again, like I said, the discretionary resources, some departments have had some pretty substantial, almost annual large increases that are going in, where others, have either made sacrifices or made cuts, or they're delivering, just enough services to stay within their resources. And so the intent is to get some of those other departments who haven't had that history, a larger increase.
Okay.
And then those that have had the larger increases approved and, a little bit smaller, but still keeping in mind, they also are seeing escalating costs to start that. So then we can continue to have that discussion.
Okay, thank you.
It's always a tough discussion when you start talking about how to split up the general fund and how it gets distributed out to departments. Yep.
All right. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks. How we doing? Well,
pretty straightforward this year. Be page 104, 105 on your books. This will be the 4016, which is the main county maintenance budget. Really, there's not a lot of changes. I've made, this year, I was given authority to hire 2 new maintenance 1 positions, and that's going to be on line 40343. That's going to be right now the most significant change on here. We've hired them to start doing janitorial within the courthouse. So we're in the process of training them right now. And then they'll take over their duties. They'll start full-time here on the 9th. And so they'll be coming in early in the morning. And so that seems to be working really well right now. So I'm kind of excited to see how that's going to work out. Hopefully I won't get as many phone calls or emails. So it's working out pretty good. I'm working on a couple of reclasses. I don't have them done right now. But eventually I'll have 1 person that I'll promote that'll be kind of working with these maintenance 1s and kind of be over them. He's been here for several years. Just having somebody that knows the area better around them. And then another one that I'm working on that'll be more of an assistant to me. Other than that, that's it. There's materials and services. We've kind of left those, I've left those fairly static other than just moving a couple numbers around there, but it's still the same. Hasn't changed. We'll never run out of projects.
And, Jason, maybe just for your benefit, a little bit of background on how revenue comes into this fund. So we charge non-general fund departments rent and maintenance charges based upon the square footage that they occupy. And then general fund departments are charged rent only. And then that revenue is split between Fund 4016, which you have before you right here, and 4027 and 4016 that Joe just went over. It receives a flat amount, that 265,000 from that revenue that we collect. That's there in 380.10. Oh, sorry, the one right below. 14. And so, yeah, that's used to fund operations here, maintaining the buildings, making minor repairs, and cleaning the buildings, as Joe was alluding to there. Yeah.
Then that's, it's internal charges. And if you look at line 36204, that's an outside entity that pays rent for the space that's OSU out at the Adair building. So that's where that number comes from. Questions?
I've really enjoyed seeing Daniel in the courthouse. He's very
Good,
talkative and
good.
says hi.
Good. Yeah, he seems to really be doing well.
He
The
was-
Nick, what's that?
No, I was just, never mind. I was just going to tell a Daniel story and how he's just happy to come to work and very appreciative of the recognition. So we are grateful that he's here.
Good. Well, the next one that I have for you would be on page 106 and 107. And this is 4116, and this is the jail maintenance budget. And there has been no changes whatsoever in that. That one's pretty much stayed the same. Same personnel, other than increase in wages. That's pretty much it.
And the revenues for this one, for the jail maintenance, looks a little bit different. There's the transfer, you may recall, from Jessica Beach's presentation earlier with the 1145 monies. That's the 356,881 that comes in from Fund 21. And then there's a general fund transfer that also comes in at 407,000. And that's the maintenance for the jail.
That's pretty much it, unless you guys have got some questions for me.
I think we're good. Thank you.
Thanks,
Well,
Joe.
Before you get too far, you might as well stick around for 4027.
Thank you.
I was gonna ask, he was gonna.
Which is,
We're doing.
We have
Shane or-
Shane first.
I'll just keep I'll dog ear it.
With IT.
Yeah.
hey Shane,
We're
would
gonna
you
come back
mind
to
if we
capital. Oh,
run
capital
through
is-
these
oh,
other
mileage
ones
was
really
next.
quickly? I think it should be
Or
quick.
after.
Sure.
Thank you,
I'm
Shane.
thinking.
He's
about
been pacing back there, so.
I'm fine.
I'm sensing you're putting up your firewalls. Um, So why don't we go ahead just really quickly, 4027, because it's in order of the book, so page 108.
Yeah, so as I stated earlier, revenue for this fund is collected through the internal charges that are charged to departments. The funds in 4027 are generally used or for major remodels to our existing inventory of buildings. So, and some of you may be aware, some of you aren't, but we've been going through a process of developing a strategic capital plan for our county campus. So we have $1 million called out there from our beginning balance that we're reserving to utilize for, implementing this plan and
Future improvements.
future improvements as called out within that plan. So that's why that is broken out there in 301.02. And then I believe 38091, some ARPA funds
Correct.
are involved in that. The majority of that are ARPA.
There was the question yesterday about HHS and the public health and the response and the capital funds we were setting aside. Those are the funds right there that we're moving into this fund to make sure it's part of the capital reserve for future improvements. But specifically the question around the ARPA funds for what we called under the public health category, that's the money right there. Instead of doing the transfer to HHS and having them reserve it, it made more sense to move it to 4027, which in fact is our capital reserve, and that's where we have the funds.
So that's not the whole balance, right?
Oh, balance.
No.
3.120.
No. No, there's another million that's going to another Fund 40 account that we haven't gotten to yet. All right.
You can see that we've reserved it if you flip to the next page there. 990.03. That's where we're putting that for future implementation of the plan that we're developing here.
Microphone. A little closer to your microphone.
Oh, sorry.
The other thing I would just call out with 4027, it's not just for remodels and improvements. We also have several interfund loans based on some past property acquisitions that were done many years ago that we're paying for out of 4027. You can see down in 780.34, we have a couple loans, one including the Stern block, and I'm trying to remember what the other loan, I'm not remembering it off the top of my head. So we do have some loan repayments of interfund loans that this fund also takes care of. And eventually we'll invest some more funds into microphone. And so we have these funds that are built in here. And you'll see that we did appropriate, Justin and I talked about this. We are keeping some funds in the miscellaneous building remodels because, we do have needs that come up during the fiscal year. And we are trying to work with the district attorney's office with the remodel he's requested. Admittedly, it's probably going to be a little more scaled back than what the drawings are, and some of the designs that have come forward, because we're really looking at it as commissioners know with this capital planning that we've been engaged with, it's gonna take a long time setting aside the funds to come up with a price tag based on what the architects have come forward. But we do think it's pretty and important that we make sure that we are reserving some funds so we can at least implement portions of that plan as it comes forward. I think in the past, we've tried to do our very best of working with departments and doing remodels, but it's really been more of a need basis. Well, the building's crumbling, I really need to, let's do a project, and we would do a project and do a remodel. It's been more reactionary. We're really trying to shift, and with the move of working with Sarah architects and coming up with this plan is we really want to have a long-term capital plan, and we want to ensure that we have sufficient funds that we're reserving for future use that's available to actually implement it. I never want to fund a plan that sits on the shelf. And the whole intent of doing this plan, because I will say when it comes to facilities and our capital needs, we have a huge need because we're bursting at the seams. I'm not kidding, we have a former bathroom that was remodeled into an office, and someone is using that office. So that's not, it's one that we have a joke about, but we have a lot of these old historic homes, we have some older buildings, we have additions, we have challenges with our facilities, and it's really impacting our capital plan has not kept pace with our growth as an agency, and we definitely need more space. I think long-term we can realize potential long-term cost savings and efficiency improvements if we were better in a space that was actually designed to be offices, a commercial office space, versus a house that's been converted into a commercial office space. So, that being said, we still have a long ways to go for setting aside sufficient funds, but historically, the county has been very diligent and deliberate in not necessarily taking out a lot of loans or doing things that we've used our funds. We've used more inter-fund loans, which is slightly different. We're not incurring debt that we're repaying elsewhere. We've done more inter-fund loans, and we've built up reserves to implement plans. And as part of that, that's what we're really trying to build this fund up for future improvement. So, sorry, that was probably more than what you wanted to hear.
Ken, Joe, 4027 E2001. Any particular plans, or this is just the ongoing?
We kept, the DA's office and a couple other projects.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was the DA was in that too.
Been pretty ongoing. I know we've have not sat down yet and put together a projected project list for this coming fiscal year. But still kind of in flux there. But yeah, that's where a lot of these projects like that get paid out of.
Correct.
Chair, if I might ask a quick question. So on 380.91 on revenue, I noticed it looks like we've been kind of softening away. We're bringing in around 86 or so for a few years. Does that continue? Is that part of that 2.211?
I'm trying to remember if that's on the discretionary allocation or not.
I think it is.
It is.
Yep.
Okay.
Which one?
That's the transfer to capital
Yeah,
improvement.
towards the bottom.
Okay.
Oh, okay, 86,279.
So this year it's 91,456.
Oh, that was 21, 22. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Shane, I promise the next ones are quicker.
Okay.
All right. There's no further questions on 4027. The next one is 4083. This one, we just have reserve funds. We've used this historically for replacing the postage machine. We don't have any plans, but this is something that we're keeping and for the eventual replacement of the postage everything with facilities. I know there's another Fund 40, but we'll get to it as part of the IP presentation. So.
You want to do 1017? I'm teasing.
Oh, okay, you're funny. Thanks, Shane.
You're welcome. Well, welcome administration, Board of Commissioners, Budget Committee members. Welcome to the 2022-23 Information Technology and Telecommunications Budget Presentation. Please let me know if you have questions throughout the presentation. So let's begin. If you would turn to page 113, we'll start with 1017, the Information Technology Budget. So this budget predominantly provides services such as desktop support, help desk, managing and administering computer networks, managing and administrating servers, email services, report writing, database administration. We support custom third-party software, and we also build and support any custom software we have to build. So let's start with revenue. If you look at account 3801, sharp increase there. So 3801, that number is comprised of a few things. It's network charges from table 11 in the budget instructions. It's also the corrections and HHS transfers for programmer analysts that they use. And this year there's a transfer from 4017, the computer replacement fund. So let's talk about what that transfer consists of. So there's $168,657 that's going to be used to purchase new server and storage infrastructure next year. Some of the money that we collect in 4017, the computer replacement fund, it's a surcharge. And we build that up to replace common equipment and infrastructure that the entire county utilizes. Some of that money is also money we collect as another surcharge in the computer replacement fund, and that is used to pay for Windows 10 licensing. So that's why that is higher this year. Account 380.10, of course, is table 4 in our budget instructions, adjusted software. Are there any questions on revenue? All right, let's move on to personnel. If you look at 40324, Senior Network Administrator, we had a person leave last year, so I've zeroed that out. We hired a network administrator, and that's reflected in account 40367. We also filled a vacancy with a programmer analyst. If you look at 40352, that is reflected there. So I'd just like to spend a couple minutes talking about another line item, which is 48200 extra help. Currently, we have a temporary part-time desktop support specialist, and they're really helping out with our imaging and deployments for all our computers and laptops. They also help with Windows updates and assist the other desktop support specialists. Now, this person has really been a huge help and has helped us to catch up. We were behind on our deployments, so this position has really helped us to catch up on that. This position is temporary and is going to end June 30th of 2022, so coming up very soon. I'm leaving money in this budget line item, and this is depending on the outcome of my request, because I'm asking the board for position authority and partial funding to hire a new desktop support specialist. I provided a memo, I'm sure you've looked at that, with the business justification, costs for the upcoming year, and the 5-year projections. Just to highlight some of the key things in the handout, it shows that 4814 will pay for 30% of this position, 1017, and 4814, of course, is telecommunications. 1017 will pay for 70% of this position, which is the current allocation model for all our desktop support specialists. Now, I'm just asking for funding assistance for 1017, which equates to about $79,243 for fiscal year 22-23. 4814 has the money available to pay their share. As I outlined in the memo, I also want to emphasize there might be an opportunity to move some HHS computer inventory management right now back over to IT where it belongs. They're putting up some space for storing some of their equipment, as well as they have some people managing the process. And so we would like to at least look at that, and hopefully we could shift that back. I would have to take a look just to see how much time they're spending and what kind of an FTE that would look like. But that would be the hope, is to bring that back over. Are there any questions on the proposed new position and request for funding? Also,
There's
just
no
want to,
questions from me, but I did want to say that I worked with the fellow who is the part-time or the temporary.
yes,
And he was very, very helpful.
Thank you.
I thought he represented the department well.
appreciate the feedback. I do want to emphasize too that we have about 750 people, and right now we have 2 desktop support specialists. And if you just go with the 2, it's really hard to cross-train. And one is pretty much stuck with deployments. It kind of, I feel vulnerable if one happens to go out for any reason. And so this other part-time position has been certainly a huge advantage, having that to help us get caught up, because we were behind. And then again, when you have somebody that's out, whether it's vacation or anything or sick, if you don't have people trained up, then it becomes really troublesome. So, all right. Are there any questions on personnel? If not, let's move on to materials and services, starting on page 113 and continue on page 114. So let's actually turn over to page 114. A lot of these I've already given you memos, trying to do my best at explaining why there's increases. Like if you look at department equipment 54301, it's mainly, there's just some extra equipment that we're going to purchase. The big one is always 68307, software licensing and maintenance. Big spike there again from 654,000 to about 794. I think if you look at the memo though, part of that is emphasizing that IT is paying for the ongoing costs for 2-factor authentication. There's also a new requirement from OSP, which is Oregon State Police, for CJIS departments to have a P2 license for Office 365. And a P2 license provides more auditing capabilities, and it allows for restrictions to deny logins from certain locations. And they've made that as a requirement. So we're picking that up. And then we're also paying for the first group and second group of Windows 10 licenses. And then I set aside 50,000 just for anything that might come up, and factoring in increases of cost of doing business. If you actually compare our licensing costs from last year to this year, if you take those additional line items out, you'll note that really from last year, we actually went from 654,000 down to about 628. So we actually had a slight decrease. The only reason it spiked is because of these new items. So I also want to highlight that if you factor in the extra licenses that IT is now going to pay for, that's almost $45,000. Plus IT also covers the annual Office 365 licenses, which are currently $160,000 a year, and that's countywide for everybody. And that's actually, Microsoft has given us a bump next year. It's going to go up to 195,000. So that's actually an increase of almost $240,000 expense that IT covers for licenses that are used by multiple county departments. So I would just add that, and that's really, a key reason why I'm asking for partial funding for this position, because some of my money is going to those licenses, if you will. Any questions on materials and services? If not, we can move down.
Nope.
Thank you. Okay, we can move down to capital projects, 80104, $272,000 there. So that includes $168,000 that essentially is coming from the computer replacement fund. That is what I mentioned earlier. That's going to be used for the new storage and server infrastructure. And we anticipate the total cost for that project to be around $240,000. And I'm not asking for any financial assistance for that project. Any questions on 1017? Information technology budget. All right, if not, let's move on to page 115. 4814, telecommunications. So we provide voice communication services for the county, city of McMinnville, and Yamhill Communications Agency, which is YCOM 911. Their business lines only, so just a handful of phones. Pretty healthy beginning balance overall. And unless you have any questions on revenue, it's pretty straightforward. If not, we can move on to personnel. And again, you'll note 40324 is the senior network administrator zeroed out. And then the network administrator, of course, 40367 is at a 0.3 allocation there. And that's all I have for personnel for this budget. If there's any questions, please ask. If not, we can move on to materials and services. So if we go down to 68307, software licensing and maintenance, you notice a jump there. It's not really a jump. It's okay. Telecommunications is paying for part of SysAid, which is our help desk ticketing system. They kind of share that cost with information technology because we both departments use it. Our MyTel maintenance, which is our VoIP system, if you will, for the county, for the phones, part of a security product, again, that it splits with 1017, and some network switching support. And we came up with that line item because a lot of those items used to be in 61102 contract services, and really it's not contract services. So this really kind of truly reflects what that expenditure is. So that's why we have that line item, and we've moved some more things in there. Any questions on materials and services? If not, we can turn the page to 116 and we can go to 80123 capital projects, and I've set 200,000 aside essentially just for anything that comes up. And we have a projected ending balance in 99001 of $250,558. Any questions on 4814 telecommunications? Nope. All right. Last one. Okay, let's turn to page 117. This is a computer replacement fund. So essentially departments pay each year for their PCs, laptops, and MDTs. So at the end of a life cycle, they've essentially paid for a new device. So we purchase that device and we deploy it. And we have 4-year life cycles on laptops, and we have 5-year life cycles on desktops and MDTs. So we'll start with revenue, and pretty healthy beginning balance, $967,083. That's 30160 account. Moving down, 38001, not a huge increase. I'll just explain what that is. As a reminder, it comes from telecommunications, which is 4814. And this is used to build up monies that both IT and telecommunications use to replace equipment. So that is telecommunications portion. So every year we have an algorithm, and this is the monies that's put over there. And then when the time comes to replace some of the common equipment, we can use those funds. And 382.1, of course, is table 10 in the budget instructions. Any questions on revenue? Okay, let's move down to materials and services. So 54301, we have $231,485. That's what we're projected to spend on replacement devices next year. And the balance remaining is down in the reserve for future capital, which is in 990.29. If you look at 54302, MDT equipment, that's changed from 75,000 down to 39,000. The sheriff is looking at some options for MDTs and just has asked that I keep all funds available. So all funds are available right now. And essentially on July 1st, he will be putting $39,000 into this fund. And I'm just making it available. And if you note 990.03, there's $0 there. And that was at his request. And that is pretty much it for the computer replacement fund. Does anybody have any questions?
I do not.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, before I go, I just want to thank my team as always. They do an outstanding job. It's a pleasure to work with them each and every day. And I want to thank you for all your hard work and the time and support that you put into this. Thank you all. So
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of your day. Right, yeah.
So the next budget is, the next page is page 118, which is 4117 software reserve. This is kind of this is an admin slash IT slash reserve fund that we use for major capital software purchases and projects. Am I doing this one? I don't know why I'm talking to my mic. Okay, it is working. Okay. So what we have, the biggest thing and really the only thing that's in this project right now is the Oracle ERP project, which is our central finance system. That's a project that we've been setting aside reserve funds. This is also one of them where we've identified as one of the ARPA funds that's being able to transfer in. This is, you know, with this transfer, so you're seeing the I think it's 1.5 million that we're looking to transfer in to finish this project. And this is something that's we're going live with a portion of the accounting portion of the module goes live in June. And then we kick off the next module, which is the HCM, aka the HR, which includes HR, payroll, benefits, all of those, everything from time cards to everything else that's part of the Oracle project. Is the next phase, and then also the budget phase. And this has a benefit for every single department because, again, this is our central finance system. Every single department within the county feeds information into this, pulls information out. It's how we manage everything that's in this budget document, from everything from the bills we pay to the monies received to handling all personal things. So it's a very large and robust ERP system. And I know that's one of the challenges that we've had this spring because of the time commitment in rolling this out. I look at Mike and Shane, and, you know, in particular, they've been involved with this project and burning a lot of midnight oil to keep up with their day jobs as well. So we're replacing the engines of the airplane while trying to keep it in the air. So, so there's not much really more to share on this one. This is another place where we're looking at transferring ARPA funds into this to finish the project next year. And we're on schedule and on budget to finish this project next fiscal year. And then that's the only active project that's in this one right now.
Sure, if I could ask. So for tomorrow, and I don't know if it's in the back, but for tomorrow, can we get a complete list of proposed ARPA allocations for the bud, for internal?
Yeah.
And just have that broken down. Okay.
So any questions on 4117? All right, thanks, Shane.
I just have one comment. I just want to give a special thanks to Mike because he has taken the brunt of this and done an outstanding job. And all of us are putting in extra time, but he is putting in a lot of extra time. So special thanks to him that, in my opinion, the project's going really smooth and it's really, a real shout out for Mike. Thanks for all the hard work that you do. Much appreciated.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, and I believe we've made it through all the budgets. The one thing I would like to do is I'd like to go back to Fund 26 because I have some clarifications to make, and I'll start off with an apology because in my scramble of that I already did something in this budget which I thought I didn't do. So the request that I was making on the note of moving the 144,000 up into that line, the 200,000 is for both the bypass and the SEDCOR contract. I did leave that in there as a placeholder. It's one that I overlooked my notes. So there's no need to move those funds. The ending balance that we do have there, the 358,000, we left more of that in the ending balance depending on what the board you know, or the committee would like to do. If you would like to see an increase to the strategic investment grant funds, we could increase those lines, but you see that we do have an ending balance of 358,000. So that 200,000, our share of the bypass loan is, it's 40,000. At one time it was increased to 50,000, and then the other 144,000 is for the STEDCOR contract. And so there is a little bit extra. That 200,000 gave another 6,000 just for some additional appropriation authority in case there's any further changes. So I just wanted to clarify that. So the change that I was asking for does not need to be made because it's already there.
Okay.
Ken, can we note that in the budget so that it's delineated?
We can make a footnote in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, I have one more request. Under commissioners. I don't know where in here, you know, if we get reimbursements for things, so we drive to Roseburg or whatever and come back and we get reimbursed for that. Where is that?
Travel.
So any and all reimbursements are under travel?
It depends on the type of reimbursement, but most of the time, any type of reimbursement for mileage or meals or things like that, that's usually booked under travel, the expense.
Okay. So where is it? So we
On 630.01 is the travel expense.
so we budget 5.
Mhm. And that can also be used sometimes in the past if there's airfare, hotels, everything along those lines. Everything would come in to that line.
Okay, so year-to-date actual is 2,339. So that's between all 3 of us.
That could be all 3. It's anybody, any of the
It could be
personnel.
ambulance, yeah.
It could be the 3 commissioners. It could be support staff, you know, it's all the above.
It's everybody. in the budget.
All the personnel that are in this budget, any reimbursement that meets that category would be recorded to that line.
Okay. I would like to see for transparency, each commissioner broken out. Because I think that what we've seen in the past is you can start to rack up some significant reimbursements if you're charging for every single mile that you're traveling. We have different ways of doing that. A lot of us we don't charge anything. But that can constitute over a year a significant amount of money. So I think for public transparency, I would love to see that broken out.
There is a means for tracking that. And that's why we have expense reimbursement forms that are subject to public records requests. So anytime that I submit to the county for a reimbursement for a mileage request or meals or anything like that, I fill out an expense reimbursement, and that's submitted to the county, and it's kept, there's a record of that. It's associated with that. As far as the budget document and breaking that out, much like when you get into, we do have project codes that we can build into the budget, but that's not something that, you know, because again, the budget document sets the appropriation level. It's not intended to be kind of a tracking accounting mechanism for that. We build that $5,000 to make sure that we have the funds appropriated as needed. So then any expenses recorded. As far as, I think we have other means available for that accountability or questions that may come up for the transparency that is more along the lines of the expense reimbursement. We could set up project codes within the budget, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily displayed in the outward facing for the budget, because it's not really, the budget is set in the appropriation level for the year. It's not really because again, it's our number that we budgeted for that year, what we think we might spend for the next fiscal year. It doesn't show what we spend each year. I don't know, Mike, if you have other thoughts. Right. So there's a couple ways to accomplish that. I don't know if we haven't really, like if we start, The simple way is something that we're learning from going through a software conversion where we're going from GEMS to Oracle is how many GL codes and type codes we have in the budget. You know, we go through all these lines and you see the 1013 400.01. And if you break that out, you know, we have departments and we have, well, I mean, Mike, we have thousands of type codes.
I don't know. I can't.
You know, and so see, that's where we start getting difficult, that if we start subdividing categories even further, then we start, you know, like if we had travel 630.01, 630.02, 630.03 based on a subset. That's why sometimes we may apply a project code, but that's more for an internal tracking and how we record things. Now, we could set that up relatively easy, but that doesn't mean it would be forward facing. It's not something we publish in the budget. The part that I would emphasize, if there's questions about travel expenses and things, again, I kind of go back to the expense reimbursement forms. You know, we get a number of public records requests all the time, and we'll produce expense reimbursement forms. If we have reports that have been run that may have created a record, we can present that as well. I don't know if that answers your question or.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it might be too difficult to do it in here, but I've been talking to other commissioners and how they do things. Some of them have policies where, you know, if a single commissioner exceeds $1,500 or whatever in reimbursable expenses, then everything going forward has to come before the board for approval. It's a check and balance on kind of that back door of reimbursable expenses. So,
and that could be a policy decision that the board could take. You know, you have a policy that comes forward along those lines, much in the same way you look at the commissioner's discretionary fund, 699.00. You know, we have 4,500, but that's $1,500 per commissioner is how that's been set up for years. And so that's how it would be displayed. So like if the board wanted to take a policy, like an example that each commissioner has $2,000 in travel expenses, then the fund would look like it would, in here, it'd be $6,000. And then we would have that policy document that then would support that each commissioner has a $2,000. And then if there were questions on how to track that, the request, we could run a report and we could generate that information.
okay. Okay, so it sounds like maybe a policy track would be easier. And then if we wish to publicize that, I think that would be great too. So,
And I think in the past, there were concerns about past commissioners and the amounts that they were. So I think and so public records requests were done and it was shown, you know, what each commissioner had spent. I think that maybe at the end of the day, a yearly accounting of what each commissioner has spent would be instructive for us to add for anything public facing so that people can go, oh, wow, there's quite a discrepancy here of commissioners who are using it and those who are not. So I think that's important.
Which thing are you using? Are you talking about the discretionary or the travel expenses or both?
Well, the discretionary, I had asked years ago, I think like about 7 years ago, soon after I became a commissioner, I said, do we have a policy about what this money can be used for? And at the time, the commissioners did not want to put in a policy. So I was concerned about the use of this money for a variety of things that I didn't think were appropriate or that the taxpayers would. So again, I think the more that and the more that we can show what commissioners' expenses are at the end of a year or 6 months, I think people would want to know that. I don't know how we do that, but that might be another thing.
we can bring forward.
Why are you looking at Christian? Is that a?
No, I know Christian's here.
Oh,
because
I'm
when
sorry.
we get a
Okay, that's
chance,
another.
He wanted to clarify on one of the questions he was asked, so.
Okay.
One other.
I have one
Yep.
other quick, the ambassador scholarship. It says we haven't given anything to date. Is that just because it goes out late?
At the fair.
Right. It says year to date. Wait, yeah, 0. Okay, so it just
Yeah.
doesn't show. Okay.
I think I remember signing the check request. That was last week, maybe.
Thank you. That's it.
All right, Christian.
Great, thanks. Real quick, just wanted to get back and address the question that Commissioner Burschauer had raised before about the higher than anticipated professional services expenses in fiscal year 2021. Ken's recollection was right on. We had a vacancy in our office in the spring of 2020. We had that position funded through fiscal year 2021, but we didn't end up filling that position until last August. And so we were also in the middle of bargaining, and we had at one point, I think we had as many as maybe a dozen grievances that we were, and maybe higher, that we were dealing with. And so as those grievances increased, our use of outside counsel increased. And so by design, we didn't fill that vacancy to help provide some cushion and some funding to help cover those outside counsel expenses. So we had higher than expected professional services, but we had a vacancy that provided the funding for that. And then we had our typical property tax appeal expenses for that year as well, but it was primarily driven by the grievances. And then once those matters settled, sort of late spring of last year, then we picked the recruitment back up. We still had the position funded in this year's budget. And then we filled that position in August of last year. So it was sort of a one-time, hopefully a one-time scenario that we don't see again.
And I recalled to Commissioner that, or Chair, not Chair, that we actually had reduced in the previous budget that professional services because we hired an attorney that we thought was going to take on some of those responsibilities. So then the line item was smaller.
We did, and then the
we spent
vacancy,
more on it.
right? And then the vacancy we had was in that position where we had hoped to have some additional in-house support for labor and employment issues. But one thing I forgot to mention before is Jody Callahan, who we hired in January in the Assistant County Counsel 2 position, comes from Lynn County with some experience in property tax appeals. And so I anticipate being able to bring those needs back in-house as well. I do think we'll still have the occasional labor and employment matter that we use outside counsel for, but and the timing is right because the attorney we were using for property tax appeals just let us know a couple of weeks ago that she's retiring in December. So it'll be great to have Jody in-house to be able to pick those up as well. So that should help keep those professional services and outside counsel costs down going forward.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hope that helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, I'll just say that I went through my checklist, checked it again. So that concludes all of the funds we were able to get through all the various budgets. So at this point, we are completed with presentations, and I know we're running late. And so tomorrow morning, the next thing on the schedule is, I believe the first thing would be the elected officials compensation committee. So of course, this is the fun part because Denny and Jason and Doreen, you're the compensation committee. And so you'll have a presentation tomorrow morning. And you may be hearing from elected officials as well with requests. And then once you have those recommendations and you vote on those recommendations, we'll go straight into deliberations for the budget. And I have been tracking for the last 2 days all of the various requests that have come forward, including the request that came forward last night at the hearing. They're all going to be on a deliberation sheet, so it will help be able to track, what requests are pending action and the amount of funds, and then also knowing what funds are available. We typically will call out specific areas that are discretionary funds by nature that are available for, and what we use for one-time requests or just kind of general fund requests, and it'll help update and so you can kind of track as requests are approved what the balances are going to look like going forward. And then once we get through the deliberation list, then we'll be looking to have a motion and consideration on approving the budget as presented. And then we can move on to the next step. So.
Right.
Chair, if I might. There was some discussion maybe a month ago from said quarter when I was talking to Armstrong about they might have made a recommendation for the strategic investment money. Is that included in anything?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't
I think we're just allocating it this way, right?
Yes.
Or appropriating it.
Appropriating. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we don't necessarily need to talk about that now.
You can, but like I was saying, when we kind of circled back to Fund 26, there are some funds in the ending balance. And if the board and the committee would like to see more of those funds moved into expense lines, we can do that. For if you want to see more grants rolled out, more funding.
Okay, I don't know that we have actually seen their request though. I don't think I have.
Their request from said court. I don't remember seeing an actual funding request.
No,
I
but
think everything has been
there's
ARPA
a certain-
related. I'm sorry.
If there's a certain amount that is goes over and above what's already appropriated, then we could deliberate on whether we want to move money from the ending balance up into one of those line items, right? That would be, rather than if we're not approved, we don't need to approve anything because we're not policy setters.
Correct. Correct.
But have you seen a number? I don't know.
I haven't seen a number. If I'm remembering correctly, it was a discussion around the impacted industries money plus the 200 or so, whatever is in that bucket.
Okay.
So
I mean, because there's some, but admittedly, when I looked at it workload wise and with all the ARPA grants that we've been rolling out, I wasn't anticipating that we were necessarily, I think the likelihood if we did strategic investment grants, we'd be looking at late fall, early next spring and rolling something like that out.
Okay.
But at the same time, I did want to make some funds available within there in case if we wanted to do some smaller grants during the fiscal year. That's why I put those funds there and made it available. We could add additional funds to those lines if you want to make sure that if it's something that the board's going to want to do to roll out strategic investment grants like we did. I think the last time we did it was in 2019. All pre-COVID.
Mhm.
Well,
Okay.
maybe it's something where we can, if you can get some
Well-
information on a total, that's if it's more than 125.
Is that what it is?
We
125?
have 125 between
Okay.
the three different
Right.
grants. But there's a
Okay.
significant ending balance.
Right.
So it could move up into one of those line items. If you have a sense of,
I don't know. I don't know what the ask was or the suggestion. It wasn't really an ask.
Yeah, and I don't remember seeing a recommendation on that.
Okay.
Admittedly, most of my communications with SEDCOR have been more ARPA related than it
Mhm.
has for this fund, these funds.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's bring this meeting to an end. We'll adjourn.